My name is Private First Class Daniel Miller. I was 21 years old that morning, June 6, 1944. Back home, I was just Danny from Scranton, Pennsylvania, steel town, coal dust, church on Sundays, baseball in an empty lot behind the rail yard. Out here, on this cold gray piece of the English Channel, I was one rifle among thousands in the 29th Infantry Division, Company B, about to hit a stretch of French coast code named Omaha Beach, near a little place called Vierville-sur-Mer. They told us in training that war turns boys into men. Nobody mentioned what it does in exactly 1 hour. The sky was the color of lead when I first saw France. It was just a darker blur on the horizon, a smudge under low clouds, but we knew that was it. Europe, Fortress Europe. Somewhere inside that fog of distance, men we had never met were waiting to kill us. I stood packed shoulder to shoulder in the landing craft, the LCVP pitching and slamming against the waves, diesel fumes and salt spray choking my nose. 40 men jammed into a box of steel and wood. The ramp in front of us was up, so we couldn't see much, only strips of sky over the top and the green helmets bobbing in front of me. To my left was Joe Harper from Alabama, freckled, 22, a farm kid who could skin a rabbit in 30 seconds and who slept with a picture of his girl folded twice in his breast pocket. To my right was Rodriguez from Texas, 17 but claiming to be 18, dark eyes too old for his face. Rodriguez whispered, "Hey Danny, you think we'll actually make it up that beach?" His voice was trying to be casual, but it had a thin edge, like a wire pulled too tight. I swallowed, my own throat dry as sand. "We trained for it, didn't we?" "Yeah," Joe muttered. "We trained in Virginia with some captain yelling. The Germans got machine guns and real bullets." Someone near the bow vomited, the sickly sweet smell mixing with brine and fuel. A wave slammed us sideways, the whole boat lurched, and a few guys grabbed at the ropes bolted along the hull. I could hear it even before I understood what I was hearing. A distant, steady growl like thunder that never stopped. Naval guns, our guns, the big boys offshore pounding the coastline. Every few seconds, the sky on our left or right flashed white, followed by a rolling boom that vibrated through the planks under my boots. "The Navy's softening them up," our coxswain yelled over his shoulder, voice hoarse from shouting. "Just like the briefing, boys, when that ramp drops you move, get off the goddamn beach." He was maybe 30, from Boston by his accent, with a cigarette stuck to his lower lip, ash blown away by the wind. His hands were steady on the wheel. I gripped my M1 Garand until my knuckles ached. 8 rounds in the clip, a bayonet on my belt, 2 grenades tugging at my webbing, canteen slap against my thigh. My heart was beating so hard I felt sure everyone around me could see it, hammering through my jacket. I tried to steady my breathing, the way Sergeant Whitman had taught us back in basic. "In through the nose, Miller, out through the mouth. You panic, you're already dead." I breathed in diesel and fear, out came the same. To distract myself, I thought of home. My mother at the kitchen window turning to call me in for dinner. The way my kid sister, Emily, would run down the street with a kite that never quite wanted to fly. The American flag hanging from the porch on holidays, colors bright against the soot-gray houses of our block. That flag had felt like something distant and ceremonial then. Out here in this rotten little boat with the chill cutting through my wool and the knowledge that men were waiting to drop shells and bullets onto my head, it became something else. Not cloth, not a symbol, a promise, a reason, a thing you could hold onto when nothing else was solid. The chaplain had moved from boat to boat before we'd loaded, saying quick words, hands brushing helmets. I hadn't caught all of what he said, but one sentence stuck. "You're not going alone, your country is behind you and God is with you." Right now, I wasn't sure about God, but I held on to the idea of my country, the faces at factory windows, the men in mines, the women at lathes, the kids rolling scrap metal down the street. All those people had shipped rifles and boots and rations so that I could storm this beach and end this nightmare. I owed them more than my fear. The boat shuddered again. We were getting closer, you could feel it. The thunder of naval guns was heavier. Over it now I could hear sharper cracks, artillery smaller, angrier. Some of it was ours, some of it was. Someone up front yelled, "Incoming," and ducked. A second later, a shell landed close enough that a geyser of water crashed over the side, drenching us in freezing spray. A fragment of something, steel or rock, I'll never know, whined past my ear and punched into the wall behind me with a hollow thunk. A voice at the back started praying aloud, rapid and breathless. "Hail Mary, full of grace." Joe whispered, not quite joking, "Guess that's our pre-game show." "Shut up, Harper," someone snapped. I didn't pray out loud, but inside my skull the words came anyway. Not elegant, not memorized, just please let me do my job, let me not run, let me not shame myself. If somebody has to die, let it be me and not the kid from Texas, not Joe with the picture in his pocket. We slammed down hard into a trough, then climbed, then slammed again. The coxswain yelled 30 seconds. 30 seconds. That's nothing in a normal day, half a minute to tie your boots or rinse your face. But those 30 seconds stretched like wire pulled across an abyss, every sense sharpened. I could hear the clack of gear, the nervous coughs, the soft metallic song of dog tags kissing each other on chests that rose and fell too fast. I found myself counting my breaths. 1, 2, 3. The ramp in front of us still hid the shoreline, but now I could see flashes strobing over the top. Not just our guns anymore. Muzzle flashes, rapid and bright, like the beach was rimmed with lightning. 15 seconds, the coxswain shouted. I felt my legs wanting to tremble, but years of my father's stern voice and months of sergeant's curses held them. My fingers checked the action of my rifle for the 10th time, safety off, chamber loaded, sling tight. Joe on my left nudged me with his elbow. Hey, Danny. I turned my head just enough. If I buy it, he said, voice low, tell my ma I didn't run all right, that I went forward. You can tell her yourself, I answered, and was surprised to find that I meant it. I refused in that tiny second to imagine him falling. The coxswain yelled 10, when this ramp drops, don't bunch up, fan out, get to cover. 9-8. The boat slowed, the engine's pitch changing, hull grinding against something, sand or steel, I couldn't tell. The smell of cordite was in the air now, mixed with smoke. My stomach lurched, not from motion but from anticipation. 07. Rodriguez had his lips moving silently. Maybe he was talking to God, maybe to his mother, maybe to both. He met my eyes and gave a quick, tight smile that said, I'm terrified. And I'm going anyway. 6-5. Another shell landed close. The concussion slammed into us like a physical shove. My ears rang. For a heartbeat, the world went muffled, like cotton stuffed into my skull. Somebody screamed high and raw, though I didn't know from where. 4. I thought of the flag on my porch again. Of the newspaper headline my father would be reading months from now if I lived, Allies land in France. I imagined him tracing the words with a work-scarred finger and saying, my boy, in that. 3. I braced my boots, bent my knees slightly the way the sergeant had shown us. Don't stand straight in the ramp. You'll make yourself a taller target. 2. The sound of machine guns was very clear now, stuttering, overlapping, the air itself buzzing. 1. The coxswain bellowed Geo, 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 and hit the lever. The ramp dropped. The world became a camera flash from hell, light, sound, and death all at once. The first man in front of me took a bullet through the face before he could even lift his boot. His head snapped back, helmet flying, and he collapsed backward into the rest of us, spraying us with hot, shocking wetness. Another man beside him jerked as rounds stitched across his chest, blood blooming through his jacket like red flowers. Instinct drove us forward anyway. There was nowhere else to go. I surged, shoved, half climbed over falling bodies, boots slipping on blood-slick planks. The air was full of snapping, whistling, whining, bullets tearing through steel and flesh and water. I made it 3 steps onto the ramp when someone screamed. They're zeroed in on the ramp. Over the side, over the side. The man in front of me jumped, not onto the beach but sideways into the gray, heaving water. I saw him vanish, swallowed up, gear and all. Another followed, and another. I didn't think thinking meant stopping and stopping meant dying. I threw myself over the side. The cold hit like a hammer. The channel swallowed me whole, salt water flooding into my nose and mouth, blinding my eyes. The weight of my pack, my ammo, my rifle dragged me down instantly. In that split second, panic screamed inside me, you're going to drown before the Germans even get you. I kicked, legs burning, lungs already begging for air. My helmet slid forward over my eyes, I shoved it back clumsily. Something heavy bumped against my shoulder, another soldier, maybe dead, maybe just as desperate as I was. Above, the water glowed dull gray from the overcast sky. Shadows moved across it, boats, bodies, the churning foam of shells hitting nearby. I thought not like this, not in the damn water. I forced my limbs to work, kicking, shrugging, clawing at the invisible weight of my gear. The straps bit into my shoulders, but I kept moving, driven by a raw, animal refusal to die faceless under the waves. My boots finally scraped something solid, sand. I pushed, staggered, broke the surface with a gasp that felt like tearing cloth. Sound slammed into me. The muffled roar turned to sharp, shattering chaos, screams, explosions, the deafening chatter of machine guns, the high whine of ricochets. Water slapped my face. I blinked it away and finally saw the beach. For a heartbeat, I was paralyzed. It was like staring into a photograph of hell. The shore sloped up in front of me, a strip of wet, churned sand littered with men, obstacles like twisted crosses and iron hedgehogs, landing craft wrecked and burning. Beyond that, higher up, the dry sand, a rough shingle of pebbles and obstacles, and then the rise of the bluffs, dark and jagged, spitting fire. Men ran, men fell, some lay unnaturally still, others crawled, clutching at torn limbs or spilling intestines. Smoke drifted in ragged veils, torn apart by shockwaves. The sand nearest the waterline was already turning pink. "Move, Miller, move," someone yelled behind me. My body listened even as my mind screamed to curl up and vanish. I forced my legs to churn through the shallows, every step a fight against suction and weight. Around me, other men staggered forward, some without helmets, some without rifles, all of us hunched as if that thin curve of our backs could stop a bullet. A shell landed to my left, too close. The blast threw a curtain of water and sand over us, slamming me sideways. My ears rang again. For a second, all sound cut out and everything was too bright, too slow. I saw a man's arm spinning end over end in the air, fingers still curled as if holding a weapon. I hit the water face first, inhaled a mouthful of brine and grit, coughed, and pushed up again, spitting. Fear clawed at my spine. Run back to the boat, it hissed. Dive, hide, disappear. But there was nothing to run back to. The boat we'd come out on was already a shattered hulk, its bow chewed apart by shells. Men still on it were either slumped or leaping frantically into the sea. Forward was the only direction left in the world. I thought of the flag again, of my father reading that paper, of Emily with her stubborn kite, of what the Nazis had done to London, to Poland, to people whose names I didn't know but whose eyes I had seen in photographs. If we failed here, all of that went on. If we broke and ran, if we stayed in the water and let fear yank us under, then the darkness that had settled over Europe would spread like mold across the world. Forward! My boots left the water, hit the wet sand. I ran, half-stumbled between jagged obstacles topped with mines, the metal slick and salty under my hand as I used one to steady myself. Bullets snapped past, kicking up little devilish spurts of sand, whining like angry bees. I hunched, trying to make myself small, heart reaching for my throat. A man in front of me, a kid really, I didn't recognize his face, suddenly jolted as if yanked by an invisible string. 3 little dark spots appeared across his back, then more. He crumpled, hands clawing at the air. I stepped around him because I had to. The guilt burned, instant and acid. I wanted to stop, to help, to do anything. The training sergeant's voice echoed in my head instead. Medics help the wounded. You keep moving, you get to the objective, you stop the men making the wounded. Another shell screamed in, that unmistakable rising whistle that makes your soul flinch before your body even can. I dove behind the nearest cover, a twisted steel obstacle half buried in the sand. I hit hard, the impact driving what little breath I had left out of me. The explosion went off somewhere behind and to the right, a solid blow of sound that I felt more than heard. Sand and fragments pelted my back. Someone howled, high and broken. I pressed my helmet tighter onto my head, teeth clenched, eyes squeezed shut for a heartbeat. I was on the beach now. France was under my boots. I was in the middle of the greatest invasion in history. And I had maybe 59 minutes left to live, or to prove I deserved the uniform I was wearing. I opened my eyes, wiped a streak of someone else's blood from my cheek with a trembling hand, and peered around the jagged steel, searching for the next patch of cover, the next breath, the next decision between fear and duty. Ben etaenus bengali ben oyenus, ben patoenus, ben agedotatenus, ben podedenus, ben ongshoenus, ben ekoyenus, ben kotonatenus, ben tatabahikotaenus. I pressed my cheek against the cold, rust-scarred steel of the obstacle and forced myself to look. The beach in front of me was a killing ground. Men lay sprawled in impossible angles, some face down in the sand, waves already licking at their boots, some twisted around obstacles as if hugging them. Helmets rolled lazily in the shallows, spun by the surf. A landing craft 100 yards down beach burned, black smoke belching into the sky, flames reflected in the thin layer of water that coated the sand. Higher up, where the beach rose toward the shingle and the seawall, I could see dark rectangles cut into the bluff, concrete gun emplacements. From those open mouths came the hard, relentless flash of machine guns. No bursts, no hesitation, just a steady, mechanical scything of lead. Our naval guns were still working the heights, but their shells were landing farther inland now, behind the main German line. The bunkers themselves sat mostly untouched, solid and cruel like clenched fists. The Germans had the high ground, perfect fields of fire, pre-sighted ranges. We had water, sand, and our bodies. Something inside me wanted to stay glued to that hunk of metal forever. If I was one with it, if I pressed hard enough, maybe the bullets would forget I existed. But another part of me, a stubborn, mulish thing that sounded like my father, snarled, "You didn't cross an ocean to hug a piece of scrap iron." A figure staggered into my field of vision, hunched low, water streaming from his jacket. For a half second I thought he was some stranger, then the freckled jaw and crooked nose clicked into place. "Joe." He was bent over, his rifle clutched to his chest, helmet askew. His eyes were too wide, whites bright against the grime on his face. A bullet hit the sand a foot in front of him, spitting grit into his shins, but he kept coming. "Here," I yelled, my voice thin under the storm of sound. I waved an arm, then yanked it back, suddenly aware of how exposed the gesture made me. Joe half fell behind the obstacle, crashing into me. We ended up shoulder to shoulder, backs pressed against the metal, breath coming in hard, ragged pulls. "Rodriguez," I gasped. Joe shook his head once, eyes flicking away. "Didn't see him get off the boat," he said, voice hoarse. "Might have gone under, might have, I don't know." The words hit like a punch. That kid, that half-fake smile a minute before the ramp dropped. I started to say something, anything, but my throat locked around it. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a body bobbing in a shallow pool between obstacles, face down. The current nudged it back and forth, a grotesque mockery of breathing. Could have been anyone, could have been him. Above us, tracers stitched the air, each glowing line a reminder that somebody up there was holding down a trigger, calmly, methodically, with the single goal of turning us into more bodies in the surf. "How the hell do we get off this beach?" Joe muttered. It wasn't really a question to me, it was hurled at the universe. I risked another quick look. Farther up above the high tide line, where the wet sand gave way to drier, lighter grains and scattered shingle, I saw clusters of men pressed flat against whatever cover they could find. Low sand ridges, piles of obstacles, the stump of what might have been a sea wall. A few were pointing, yelling, trying to gesture others forward between bursts of fire. Some wore lieutenants' bars glinting faintly in the gray light. All of them were still in the same storm as us. "The briefings," I said, more to anchor myself than to inform. "They said get to the shingle, use the seawall, from there we move up the draws." Joe gave a laugh that held no humor. "Yeah, 'cause that makes it sound real easy, Danny." He wasn't wrong. Between us and that relative safety stretched perhaps 60, 70 yards of open sand, broken only by scattered obstacles and craters. And every inch of it was under observation from the bluff. But staying here wasn't safety either. We were within range of mortars. The next shell could land right on top of our little refuge and turn it into shrapnel in our lungs. A man in a different uniform, an officer maybe from another company, sprinted by, hunched low, waving his arm and shouting, "Get off the beach. Move, move up." Two men tried to follow him. One made it 5 steps before folding as if someone had kicked his legs out, his helmet spinning away. The other reached a crater halfway up the beach and dove in, vanishing from sight. "See," Joe said tightly, "running just gets you killed faster." Another shell shrieked overhead, landing farther inland with a flat crash. Clods of dirt pattered down from above the bluff, almost lost under the crackle of gunfire. I thought of all the times my father had talked about the Great War, about the trenches and the charges and the men who'd huddled in mud until orders or madness drove them over the top. He'd always ended with the same line. "Somebody's gotta take that next step, Danny. Wars don't win themselves." "Somebody." A sergeant slid into the sand behind the same obstacle, clutching his helmet with one hand and his Thompson submachine gun with the other. He was older than most of us, late 20s maybe, with a face like carved wood and stubble shading his jaw. A strip of blood marked his sleeve near the shoulder, but he was still moving like nothing was wrong. "Miller Harper," his eyes flashed to our name tapes in a fraction of a second. "You two can still run." "Yes, Sergeant," I said automatically. Joe echoed it. "Good, we're not decorating this damn beach with our corpses." He jerked his chin toward the higher sand. "See that crater, the one with the busted obstacle next to it about 30 yards up?" I followed his gaze. There, a dark gouge in the sand, lip raised maybe 5, 6 feet across. Next to it, the twisted remains of an iron thing blown almost in half. Oh yeah. We go for that on my mark, the sergeant said. One at a time, 5 seconds apart. Zigzag, don't stop if somebody falls. You stop, you die, and so does the next guy behind you, got it? My palms were slick inside my gloves. Yes, Sergeant. Joe swallowed. Which one of us first? You, the sergeant pointed at Joe. Then him, then me, on my count. Remember, your job is to make it, not to look heroic. Heads down, legs pumping. Another burst of machine gun fire raked the sand in front of our obstacle, throwing up a temporary curtain of dust. Wait for that rhythm, the sergeant said, eyes narrowing. They're walking fire across the beach. We move between their sweeps, we just gotta beat their correction. I couldn't believe he was talking about something so coldly tactical while hell was screaming around us. But a strange thing happened as he spoke. The chaos around me began to resolve into patterns. The thud of shells, the chatter of guns, the scream of the wounded, they were still there, still awful, but they stopped being one undifferentiated roar. There were angles, timing, gaps. And in the gaps lived survival. On three, the sergeant said, 1, 2. The world narrowed to the crater, the sand between us and it, and the ticking of my own racing pulse. 3, Joe. Joe exploded forward from behind the obstacle. For a second he was completely upright, a perfect silhouette against the dull sky, then he folded himself down, sprinting in a low zigzag. Sand kicked up behind his boots. I held my breath. A burst of machine gun fire tore a line in the sand 3 yards to his left, but he jinked right, stumbling, recovering, never stopping. A few more strides and he flung himself into the crater, vanishing from view. Alive. Your turn, the sergeant barked, slapping my shoulder. Now. My body moved on some pre-wired program. I surged out from behind the obstacle, the sudden exposure like stepping naked into a blizzard of steel. I ran. The world dissolved into a blur of sand and flashes. I heard nothing but my own breath rasping in my ears and the faint, intermittent crack of bullets. The trick I told myself in some detached corner of my brain was not to imagine them hitting you. You ran as if they all missed, because if you made space in your mind for even one to find your spine, your legs might freeze. Left, right, left. My boots pounded, slipping for a heartbeat in a patch of wet sand, then catching again. The crater seemed impossibly far, then suddenly it loomed up in front of me. A bullet snapped past so close I felt the air of it on my cheek. Another hit the sand just ahead, spraying grit into my eyes. I blinked, tears streaming and dove. The lip of the crater hit me in the chest. I tumbled, bounced off someone's boots, and ended up sprawled half on, half off Joe, my helmet sliding down over one eye. Jesus, Danny, Joe gasped, shoving me off. Buy a guy dinner first. I managed a strangled laugh, mostly relief. The crater stank of burnt powder and wet earth. 2 other men were already in it, pressed low, eyes flicking over the rim. One of them clutched a radio set, the long antenna bent and muddy. The sergeant landed a heartbeat later, dropping in with the practiced grace of a man who'd done this kind of thing before. He hit, rolled, and came up already checking the next stretch of beach. Above us, bullets chewed the far lip of the crater, sending little avalanches of sand spilling down into our faces. See, Joe panted, easy as Sunday school. Shut up and catch your breath, the sergeant said, but there was the ghost of approval in his tone. We're doing that again in segments all the way to the seawall. I peered over the crater's edge just enough to see. Between us and the higher sand lay more open ground, but also more cover, shell holes, fragments of obstacles, the half-shattered remains of some kind of wooden ramp. Men were scattered everywhere, some moving, some very still. Medics, identifiable by the red crosses painted on their helmets, crawled from body to body, dragging the living back by their webbing, leaving the dead for later. I watched one medic reach a man whose leg was little more than a ruined stump at the thigh. The medic wrapped a tourniquet around it with quick, sure hands, all while bullets snapped inches over his back. He never even flinched. Patriotism, I realized in that moment, wasn't just flags and speeches. It was that medic risking his own skin to give someone else a fighting chance. It was the sergeant beside me, who could have tried to ride this out in the surf but chose to drag us forward instead. It was Joe cracking jokes with his hands shaking. It was the decision, made 1,000 times in 1,000 hearts, to move into danger instead of away from it because your country needed you to. A shell landed behind us, closer to the waterline, the concussion slamming into our backs. I felt the shockwave in my teeth. Bits of something wet and heavy spattered the inside of the crater. I didn't look to see what. The radio man swore, fiddling with the knobs of his set. "Can't raise anyone," he muttered. "Either the tubes are fried or they're jamming us to hell and back." "Keep trying," the sergeant said. "We need artillery on those damn bunkers." "Artillery, hell," one of the other soldiers in the crater growled. He was big, square-jawed, from somewhere in the Midwest by his accent. "We need the Almighty to stick his hand down and swat those sons of—" A ricochet pinged off the edge of the crater, showering us with sand. He bit off the rest of his sentence. "Here's the deal," the sergeant said, low and urgent. "We weren't the only wave. More guys are coming in behind us, and if we stay stalled here, they're just gonna stack up on the beach until Jerry chews through the whole damn division. We don't move, the invasion dies right here in this pretty French sand." Pretty, the word was so absurd in this context that it almost made me laugh. "You think the folks back home put down their coffee cups this morning just so they could read about us getting slaughtered in the surf?" he continued. "No, they expect us to push those bastards off this hill, so that's what we're gonna do." His eyes swept over us, meeting each pair in turn. When his gaze met mine, something in my chest steadied. He wasn't asking us to be fearless. He was asking us to be useful. "How many grenades you got, Millers?" I patted my webbing. "Two, Sergeant." "You?" he asked Joe. "Two also." "Good, when we get closer, we're gonna need those." I swallowed. "Closer to what exactly?" He jerked his chin toward the bluff. "To whatever's spitting those bullets at us. Somebody's behind those guns. We get up there, we put steel in their faces, we shut 'em down, one nest at a time." The idea of climbing that bluff under fire made my stomach roll, but there was also a grim logic to it. As long as those guns raked the beach, we were little more than targets. Up there, at least, we could fight back even. "Ready to hop again?" he asked. My legs screamed no, my lungs burned, my heart banged against my ribs like it wanted out. But my mouth said, "Yes, Sergeant," because there was no other acceptable answer. He gave a tight nod. "Same pattern, one at a time. New holes that depression by the seawall, see it? Look for the Jeep carcass next to it." It took me a second to pick it out through the haze of smoke and sand, but then I saw it. A dark, low dip in the ground near a mound of broken concrete, beside what might have once been a Jeep, now shredded and burned. "That's where the sand levels off. From there, we use the wall." He looked at each of us again. "Remember, keep moving, zigzag, don't be a hero. Heroes are just dead men other people write stories about. We're not here for stories, we're here to win." Behind us, another wave of landing craft ground ashore. I twisted just enough to see men tumbling out, some diving immediately, some cut down on the ramps like we'd almost been. The Germans weren't running out of bullets. "We go now," the sergeant said, "before they get a better read on this part of the beach." He pointed to the big Midwestern soldier. "You first, then Miller, then Harper, then me and Radio Man together." The big man nodded once, jaw clenched, then pushed himself up, muscles coiling. I realized I'd stopped feeling the cold. Fear and exertion had burned it away. All that remained was this raw, electric awareness of my own body and the tiny, fragile space it occupied in a world bent on erasing it. The big man bolted. Fire chased him immediately, sand dancing at his heels, but he was fast, shockingly fast for his size. He hit the Jeep wreckage, dove, rolled behind the depression, gone. My turn. I could taste metal in my mouth. My fingers were numb on my rifle, not from cold now, but from how tightly I gripped it. "Go, Miller." I went. The second run was worse than the first because now I knew what it felt like to have death brush past your ear. Every step, I expected that unseen hand to reach out and pluck me down. But my legs pumped anyway, my body too well trained, or too stubborn, to listen to the screaming animal in the back of my brain. Someone somewhere was shouting something. Orders, curses, prayers, it all blurred into a single, wordless roar. Halfway to the next cover, a mortar shell landed 10 yards to my right. The blast hit like a wall, a cloud of sand and smoke smashing into me, pushing me sideways. For a 6 second, my feet left the ground. I felt like a doll flung by a careless child. Then I hit the sand chest first, the impact punching air out of me. My helmet flew off, rolling away. Grit filled my mouth, my nose, my eyes. "Get up," some calm, icy voice inside me said. "If you stay down, they'll walk a burst over your spine and that'll be it. Get up." My limbs felt heavy, my ears rang, but I forced myself onto hands and knees, spit, blinked away tears. A shadow loomed in the corner of my blurred vision, a dark shape angling toward me. For a heartbeat I thought, this is it, they've come down off the bluff. Then the shape resolved into the burned-out Jeep, its metal twisted and blackened. I was closer to safety than I'd thought. I lurched forward in an awkward crawl, then threw myself the last few feet behind the wreckage, landing half on top of the big Midwestern soldier. He grunted, shoved me off. "Hell of a day for a jog," he muttered. I managed a breathless sorry. "Keep your damn head down," he added, but there was no venom in it. A second later, Joe skidded in beside us, panting, eyes too bright. "Lost my breakfast somewhere back there," he gasped. "Hope Jerry chokes on it." If I'd had the breath, I might have laughed. The sergeant and radio man came in last, bullets snapping at their heels. The sergeant hit hard, rolled, came up already scanning. Up close, the seawall wasn't much, 4, maybe 5 feet at most, concrete crumbling at the edges, pocked by old impacts. But it was something solid between us and the guns above, and in that moment it looked like the most beautiful structure I'd ever seen. Beyond the wall, the beach ended and the bluff began, rising in a rough, brush-covered slope punctuated by those concrete teeth. To the left, I could make out a narrow defile cutting up into the heights, a draw half-choked with wire and stakes. Men were clustered along the seawall in both directions, packed tight, some firing futile shots up at impossible angles, others just lying there, sucking in air, trying to become one with the stone. We piled in with them, backs to the wall, heads down as bullets smacked into the concrete above, showering us with dust. For a heartbeat, shielded from direct fire with solid weight at my spine, I felt something I hadn't felt since the ramp dropped. I felt alive. That feeling lasted all of 3 seconds. Then an officer a dozen yards down the wall, bars on his helmet, binoculars around his neck, stood just high enough to see over the edge and yelled, voice cutting through the chaos with ragged authority. "We can't stay here, we stay here, we die here. We've got to get off this wall and up that bluff. Squad leaders, organize your men, find a way through that wire." The words rolled down the line like a wave. Men lifted their heads, eyes flicking toward the slopes above, toward the snarls of barbed wire and the slits of machine gun nests. Up there was more fire, more deaths. Up there was also the only path to victory. My mouth went dry. Joe's hand brushed my sleeve. I could feel the trembling through the fabric. "Guess the party's just getting started," he said softly. I thought of Scranton, of our little row house, of my mother folding laundry at the kitchen table, humming under her breath, of the flag on the porch hanging still in the morning air. I thought of all the men in gray uniforms on that bluff, swearing loyalty to a black-clad madman across the continent. Men who believed their empire would last 1,000 years. Not if we had anything to say about it. Fear coiled in my gut, cold and heavy. But wrapped around it, tighter than the webbing on my shoulders, was something else. A stubborn, furious refusal to let them win. Not over this strip of sand. Not over my friends. Not over my country. The sergeant caught my eye. "You ready to climb a hill, Miller?" My legs still shook, my lungs burned, my ears rang. "Yes, Sergeant," I said. Because wars don't win themselves. And the next 60 seconds would decide whether this beach became our graveyard or the first step toward taking Europe back. The sergeant's question hung between us for half a second, swallowed almost instantly by the roar beating down from the bluff. I looked up just enough to see the tangle of wire snarling across the slope, dark against the lighter sand and scrub. Above that, the blunt mouths of the bunkers spat fire in steady, murderous rhythm. Men still fell on the beach behind us. I could hear their cries floating faintly over the crash of the surf. "Yes, Sergeant," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. "Good," he replied, "because nobody else is gonna do it for us." He tilted his head back, judging the pattern of fire from the heights. Then he yelled down the line, "Engineers, where the hell are my engineers?" To our right, 3 men hunched over strange, long metal tubes, 6-foot sections they were locking together with frantic hands. Their helmets bore a small, dull insignia, their packs bulged with tools and explosives. "Combat engineers." One of them looked up at the sergeant's shout. His face was smeared with soot, glasses cracked, but his hands were steady on the bolts. "Here," he shouted back, "we're building you a front door, just keep Jerry's head down." The sergeant turned to us. "You hear that? When those Bangalore torpedoes go off, they're gonna cut a hole in that wire. That's our path up. We hold here, we give them cover, then we move the second that gap is open. Got it. Joe's eyes flicked toward the slope, then back to me. Volunteering for a nice stroll through a minefield, he muttered. My recruiter definitely left that part out. The big Midwestern guy grunted. Recruiter left a lot out. Bullets smacked into the wall above us, showering us with little chips of concrete. I hunched lower, feeling the vibrations travel through my spine. The sergeant slapped the radio man's shoulder. Keep trying that set. If you get anyone, tell him we need smoke on that wire like yesterday. The radio man, a skinny kid with hollow cheeks, nodded and bent over his pack, whispering into his handset between bursts of static. Red dog to any station, red dog to any station, requesting smoke and HE on grid. An explosion cut him off, close enough that a chunk of something incandescent whizzed past and buried itself in the wall inches from my ear. He flinched, but kept talking. Down the line, a lieutenant crawled along the base of the wall, ducking under hunched bodies, his face set in a grim mask. When he reached the engineers, he grabbed one by the shoulder. How long? He shouted. 2 minutes, the engineer yelled back, though whether that was truth or hopeful guess I couldn't tell. The lieutenant nodded, then straightened just enough to bellow, listen up. When that wire goes, we move in squads, covering fire from here and from any machine guns that can see the slope. Don't bunch up in the gap, Jerry'll be watching it. Move fast, move low, and for God's sake, keep going once you start. He ducked back down as a burst of fire tore into the wall above him. Joe's hand found my sleeve again. If I stop, he said quietly, you kick me hard. If you stop, I replied, I'll drag you until my legs give out. He gave me a crooked half smile. Deal. Someone to our left started singing, voice hoarse and wavering under the gunfire. God bless America, of all things. A few men joined in for a bar or two, then trailed off as another mortar landed close enough to make our bones vibrate. The engineers shoved the last section of pipe into place. Together, they began sliding the long, assembled Bangalore torpedo forward, inch by inch, toward the low, narrow space under the seawall where a trickle of runoff had carved a muddy channel. Covering fire, one of them yelled, we gotta stick this thing under the wire or it's just fireworks. Immediately, rifles and a couple of bars along the wall lifted and barked in controlled, furious bursts. Men fired not because they could see targets, but because they knew there had to be someone behind those muzzle flashes, peering out, squeezing triggers. I raised my own M1, braced my elbows on the wall's top edge, and fired toward the nearest bunker slit. I couldn't see whether my rounds hit anything. That wasn't the point. The point was to make the Germans flinch, even for a heartbeat. The engineers shoved the torpedo forward, one man crawling half under the wall to guide its nose into the tangle of barbed steel. For a second, his legs were all I could see sticking out, boots kicking in the sand. My stomach clenched, sure that at any moment his ankles would jerk and go limp, but somehow he kept moving. Finally, he wriggled back, face gray under the grime. It's under, he shouted. Fuse. One of his buddies worked quickly, hands surprisingly delicate as they attached the detonator. How long a fuse you giving us? The lieutenant called. 30 seconds, the engineer yelled back. Plenty of time if you're not slow and stupid. Then don't be slow and stupid, the lieutenant roared down the line. Everybody get your heads down. When this pops, we move. The engineer lit the fuse with a practiced flick. A thin snake of sparks hissed along the cord, vanishing under the wall. Down, the sergeant barked. He grabbed my collar and yanked me, Joe, and the big Midwestern down until our mouths were practically in the sand. The world narrowed to the gritty taste of it, the smell of salt and sweat and fear. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the earth kicked us in the teeth. The explosion was less a sound and more a solid, brutal presence that punched through the wall, through my helmet, through my skull. The seawall shuddered against my back. A hot breath of dust and burnt metal washed over us. Pebbles and little shards of steel rained down. My ears went instantly completely deaf. The roar of the beach vanished, replaced by a deep, dull hum. I blinked, shook my head, felt liquid at my nose. When I wiped it, my glove came away smeared with red. For a moment, everything moved in slow silence. Men lifting their heads, mouths opening in shouts I couldn't hear, the engineer grinning wildly, teeth bright against a soot-black face. Then my hearing crashed back in fragments. A high, shrill ringing like a swarm of angry insects, under which gradually the shouts and gunfire and crashing surf filtered in, still muffled but there. Where the wire had been, there was now a torn, smoking gap, ends of metal curled and twisted outward. It wasn't huge, maybe 6 feet wide, but it was a wound in the German line. The lieutenant popped up for a half-second, took one look and screamed, voice cracking, Geo through now. Men surged upward as one. What squad are you? The sergeant yelled at us. Bravo Company, 1st Platoon, I shouted back automatically. You're my spearhead then, he snapped. Miller, you and Harper first. Big guy, you're right behind him. I'm on your ass. We get through that wire and we keep climbing till somebody physically stops us or we run out of bullets. You understand? Oh yes, Sergeant. I could hardly feel my legs. They were there but distant, like they belonged to someone else. I slapped a fresh clip into my Garand, the metallic ping of the empty one hitting the sand oddly loud in the ringing haze of my ears. The lieutenant was already halfway to the gap, leading a knot of men hunched low, tripping and sliding up the rough incline. Machine gun fire lashed the slope around them, kicking up geysers of dirt. One man spun sideways and slid back down, leaving a red smear behind. The others stepped over him. Move, the sergeant roared. Joe and I vaulted the wall together. The ground beyond dropped a little, then rose sharply, the start of the bluff. My boots sank for a half-second into loose sand and gravel, then found purchase in scraggly, thorn-tough grass. The air felt thinner, harsher, as if the enemy's hatred had diluted the oxygen. We aimed ourselves at the smoking gap in the wire. For about 3 seconds, no one was shooting directly at us. They were still adjusting to the suddenness of the explosion, still swinging their barrels toward this new threat. We covered 10 yards in those 3 seconds. Then the world lit up again. Bullets tore into the ground around us, snapping branches off the low, scrubby bushes, slapping chips of stone from outcroppings. The soft hiss of rounds passing close to skin is a sound you never forget, a kind of intimate personal violence. Zig, I started to yell to Joe. He was already doing it, veering left when I veered right, then back again, making ourselves as hard to predict as two panicked rabbits. Except rabbits didn't carry rifles and grenades, and there were no burrows on this damned slope. We hit the gap at the same time. The wire that remained on either side still bristled with jagged barbs, close enough to snag sleeves and pant legs. I saw a man to my right stumble, his webbing caught. He yanked, tried to free himself. A bullet found him in that frozen second, punching through his helmet. His body hung there for a grotesque instant, crucified on the wire, then sagged. I shoved past, heart jackhammering, the copper and salt smell of blood thick in my nose. A torn strand of wire caught my sleeve, gouging my skin, but I ripped free, feeling fabric and flesh give way. Then we were through. Behind us, more men poured into the breach, faces set in rictus masks of effort and terror. Ahead, the slope rose like the side of a giant grave, studded with rocks and clumps of brush. Up, the sergeant yelled close at my back. Use the craters, the folds, anything, stay spread out, don't skyline yourselves. I forced my legs to dig in, toes clawing for purchase. For every foot we gained, we slid back an inch on the loose ground. The weight of my gear dragged at my shoulders, my pack thumping against my spine with every lunge. My lungs burned, each breath a shallow, ragged gulp. Above, closer now, I could see infantry trenches zigzagging along the face of the bluff, linking bunkers and firing pits like the veins of some buried beast. Muzzle flashes winked from them, brief and deadly. Somewhere a German shouted orders in a harsh, guttural bark. A round hit the dirt a foot from my face, spraying me with grit. I flinched, ducked, kept moving. If I stopped, I was dead. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a simple physical fact. Grenade, someone yelled in accented English. The time slowed. A dark, egg-shaped object tumbled down the slope in front of me, bouncing off a rock, spinning. My brain labeled it before my conscious mind did. German stick grenade, handle and all, end cap smoking faintly. It landed 3 feet from Joe. He saw it the same instant I did. His eyes went very wide. For a heartbeat, panic froze him. Then training or raw instinct kicked in. He flung himself sideways up the slope, away from the grenade, not down. If he'd gone down, it would have rolled right into his chest. He wasn't fast enough. The grenade went off with a flat, concussive bang that slammed me face first into the dirt. My ears exploded with pain. My left hand went numb from wrist to fingertips. Something hot and sharp grazed my cheek. I felt warmth spilling, but not the deep, nauseating cold of a serious wound. Joe, I screamed, or thought I did. I couldn't hear my own voice over the high, keening ring in my skull. I pushed myself up with my good hand, vision swimming, and looked. Joe lay on his back a few feet up and to my left. His helmet was gone, hair matted red at the temple. His right leg jerked in little spasms, boot digging at the dirt. Blood soaked through his left sleeve, dark and thick, dripping down to his fingers. His eyes were open, unfocused, staring at the sky. For a second, my own heart stuttered. Then his gaze snapped to mine. It took him a moment to focus, but he did. He sucked in a sharp breath, tried to prop himself up, failed. Son of a, his voice came out slurred but very much alive. They scratched my damn paint, Danny. Relief flooded me so fast it made me dizzy. Can you move? I shouted. Can't feel my arm, he gasped. Leg, okay, I think. Men surged past us, some glancing down, some too locked into the forward momentum to notice anything but their own tiny patch of dirt and the enemy above. The sergeant slid in beside us, boots digging furrows in the slope. He's hit, he barked. Arm, Joe groaned. Heads, but I ain't dead yet, Sarge. The sergeant's eyes flicked over him with clinical speed. Shrapnel likely, you're not bleeding out, you stay low, Harper. Let the corpsmen get up here when they can. He grabbed my harness, yanked me closer. Miller, you moving. I can't just, I started, gesturing at Joe. You can and you will, the sergeant snapped, voice like iron. He did his job getting this far, now you do yours, you wanna honor your buddy, get up there and shut those guns down so nobody else gets hit like this. You understand me? He wasn't asking for my feelings. He was giving me a direction to pour them into. Joe's remaining good hand closed on my sleeve. His grip was surprisingly strong. Go, he hissed. Don't you dare stop 'cause of me, you idiot. I did not get my arm turned into hamburger so you could play nurse. His eyes still clear, still that odd green-brown mix bored into mine. Get up the damn hill. That stubborn, mulish thing inside me flared again. Fear and anger twisted together into something sharp. Okay, I said. I grabbed his helmet, which lay a foot away, jammed it down over his head as best I could. You hold on, I'll see you at the top. You better, he muttered. The sergeant was already moving, half-crouched, using a low fold in the ground as partial cover. The big Midwestern followed close, his bulk making a surprisingly small target as he hugged the earth. I scrambled after them, every step away from Joe feeling like a betrayal and a duty at once. The slope steepened. We angled toward a shallow gully cutting up through the bluff, its sides eroded by rain, offering a narrow channel of relative concealment. Relative because the Germans weren't blind. Rounds still cracked overhead, chewing into the lip of the gully, sending showers of dirt down on us. The air up here smelled different, less salt, more earth and cordite, and something metallic and acrid that clung to the back of the throat. A figure loomed above us at the top of the gully, a German in a field-gray tunic, helmet at a sharp angle, rifle in his hands. For a heartbeat, he seemed as surprised to see us as we were to see him, his eyes widening. He jerked his weapon down toward us. The big Midwestern didn't hesitate. He fired from the hip, his rifle barking 3 times. The German's chest caved inward in 3 neat, dark blossoms. He toppled backward, disappearing from sight. That's one less, the big man grunted. We reached the edge of the gully, bellies pressed against the damp earth. Above, the ground flattened out into a lip, then dropped again, probably into one of those trenches I'd seen from below. The sergeant raised his head an inch, peered over, then ducked back down, eyes blazing with adrenaline. Trench line 10 feet ahead, he said rapidly. 2, maybe 3 Jerrys right here more off to the left. They're bunkered in, facing the beach. They weren't expecting us this close this fast. He pointed at me. Miller, you got your grenades. I touched the heavy shapes at my belt. Yes, Sergeant. You're gonna earn your pay. On my count, you and Ox here. He jerked his thumb at the big Midwestern. Pop up, toss frags into that trench. Aim for where it sounds like the chatter coming from. You don't have to be perfect. Shrapnel will do the negotiation for you. My mouth went dry. Then what? Then we go in, he said simply. Guns up, fast and mean. Whatever's still moving and holding a weapon, you put 'em down, no hesitation, they won't give you any. He looked at me hard. These aren't paper targets at Camp Pickett, Miller, this is it. You ready to kill men who are trying real hard to kill you and your buddies. I thought of the bodies on the beach, of the man crucified on the wire, of Joe clutching his shredded arm telling me to go. Yes, Sergeant, I said, it wasn't bravado. It was a promise to the dead and the almost dead behind me. Good, he gave a single sharp nod. On 3, 1, 2. My hand wrapped around the cool metal of the grenade. I pulled the pin with a practiced twist, thumb locking the spoon in place. Ox did the same beside me, his massive fingers surprisingly nimble. All three. We surged up together just high enough to clear the lip. In that split second, I saw into the trench. 3 Germans within immediate sight, 2 crouched behind a low berm, working an MG-42 that pointed back down toward the beach, its barrel smoking. Another knelt beside them, feeding the belt, mouth open in what might have been a shout. Beyond them, the trench snaked left and right, shadows and motion hinting at more men. Their eyes snapped to us. For once, we were faster. I lobbed my grenade into the middle of the trio, not aiming so much as willing it to land where it needed to. Oxes followed a heartbeat later, sailing just past them, deeper into the bend of the trench. Down, the sergeant barked. We dropped, pressing ourselves into the wet earth, hands over helmets. The first grenade went off with a sharp, cracking bang that I felt more in my chest than in my ringing ears. The second followed almost instantly, its concussion washing over us like a hot wind. Screams cut through the gunfire, a high, animal sound that didn't care what language it belonged to. Go, the sergeant roared. We rolled forward over the lip, sliding the last few feet into the trench. The world narrowed again, from the vast expanse of beach and bluff to a 10-foot-wide strip of mud and sand lined with timbered walls and the shattered bodies of the men we'd just bombed. One of the MG crew lay sprawled backward, his chest a wet ruin. Another knelt, or rather what was left of him did. The lower half of his body was gone, ragged meat and bone ending just above his belt. His eyes were wide and glassy. He tried to lift his rifle, but his arms twitched feebly and fell. The ammo feeder lay face down, helmet blown off, blonde hair matted with blood. Farther down the trench, a soldier staggered, clothes torn, ears bleeding. He had his hand on the stock of his rifle. He saw us, mouth forming a word, maybe a curse, maybe a plea. My rifle was already up. I squeezed the trigger. The shot caught him in the throat. He collapsed, clutching at the red fountain, legs scrabbling against the mud. Someone else down the line shouted in German. A burst of submachine gun fire stitched the air above our heads, chipping fragments from the trench's rear wall. Splinters stung my cheek. We dove sideways, spreading out along the trench. Training took over again, the drills we'd cursed under the Virginia sun, the endless rehearsals of clearing bunkers and trenches that had seemed like abstract puzzles. Except now the puzzle was alive and screaming and shooting back. The sergeant slammed his back against one timbered section, peered around the corner, then snapped back, around chewing a furrow where his head had been a heartbeat before. MP-40, 10 meters down, he shouted. At least 2 more with rifles beyond him. We clear this section before they regroup or we're dead in this ditch. He looked from me to Ox. Flank 'em, I'll give you fire, don't stop till you hit the bend. Adrenaline burned away the last of my doubt. This was what we were here for, to dig the enemy out of these holes, one by one, until the beach below was no longer a shooting gallery. Ox grunted, eyes hard, let's go. We moved, boots splashing in shallow, bloody puddles, shoulders brushing the rough-hewn walls. Each step forward into that trench took me farther from the open sea and deeper into the heart of the enemy's defenses. Farther from where I'd last seen Joe. Farther into the kind of fear you could either freeze in or fight through. I tightened my grip on the rifle, felt the rough wood against my palm and chose. Benetaenus benertoenus, ben patoenus, ben agedenus, ben ongshedenus, ben ekebadenus, ben podedenus, ben kotonaenus. Ox and I moved, bent almost double, down that narrow strip of mud and timber as if the walls themselves were squeezing us forward. The trench bent left sharply just ahead, a dark angle where the MP-40 fire had come from. The sergeant's Thompson chattered in short, controlled bursts from behind us, sending slugs snapping into the bend, keeping whoever was there ducked. My boots skidded in bloody muck. The German I'd shot in the throat twitched as I stepped over him, his hands still clawing weakly at the red ruin under his chin. I didn't let myself look at his face. Corner, Ox hissed. We slammed ourselves flat against the inside wall just before the bend, me on the left, Ox on the right. My heart was punching at my ribs hard enough to bruise. Every breath scraped my lungs raw. Over the pounding in my ears, I could hear them now just beyond the turn. German voices, close and sharp, overlapping. Zamerikaner ISM Grabens. Halt die Stellung. A magazine slapped into a weapon, a metallic clack, someone sucked in a breath to shout. Ox met my eyes for a split second. His pupils were pinpricks in a mask of dirt and sweat. "I'll go high as you go low," he muttered. Before I could answer, he leaned out just enough to jam the muzzle of his rifle around the corner and fire two blind shots down the trench. The MP-40 answered immediately, its distinctive fast, buzzing bark chewing splinters from the wall above my head. Chips of wood stung my neck. I bit back a curse, flattened tighter to the sandbags. "Grenade!" Ox yelled over the dins. I patted my belt with my free hand. "One left. We might need it for a bunker." My hesitation lasted exactly a heartbeat. "They're pinning us here," that cold inner voice said. "If you don't use it, you might not get another chance." "Yeah," I shouted back, "cover me." I yanked the last grenade from my webbing, feeling its heavy, familiar weight. My fingers moved almost on their own. Thumb through the ring, twist, pull pin, keep the spoon clamped down. "Ready?" Ox roared. He leaned out again, sending another pair of rounds downrange. The MP-40 wavered, paused for a heartbeat, either reloading or ducking. "Now," he barked. I stepped out just far enough to see what I was throwing into. The trench stretched 10, maybe 12 yards ahead before bending again. Two Germans were crouched behind a low timber brace that made a crude firing step. One held the MP-40 I'd heard, his helmet low over his eyes, face tight with focus. Beside him, another with a Kar 98K rifle was just straightening up, turning toward us. Farther back, half hidden by the second bend, I caught a glimpse of another figure, maybe more. In that frozen fraction of a second, their eyes met mine. They were young, not kids like Rodriguez maybe, but not far from my age. One had a thin mustache that looked like he'd grown it just to prove he could. The other's cheeks were smooth, lips curled in a snarl that might have been fear. I threw. The grenade left my hand and arced through the air in a lazy, impossible curve. Time stretched. I watched it tumble, watched both Germans' gazes snap to it like magnets. "Granate!" one of them screamed, a note of pure terror shredding his voice. I ducked back around the corner, slammed my shoulder against the sandbags, pressed my helmet down with my palm, and opened my mouth so the blast wouldn't burst my eardrums more than they already were. The detonation was close enough to lift my boots off the ground. The trench seemed to jump under me. Hot, dusty air slammed into my back. For a second, the ringing in my ears became one solid, white wall of sound. Something wet hit my neck and slid down inside my collar. Someone was screaming. It might have been me. Then, bit by bit, the world filtered back in muffled gunfire farther along the line, men shouting in German and English, the distant, constant thunder of naval guns. "Go," the sergeant's voice cut through, hoarse but commanding. "Before they recover, go." I rounded the corner at a run, rifle up. The grenade had done its work. The sandbags and timber braces that formed the firing step were shredded, wood and cloth and flesh all torn together. The MP-40 gunner lay half on, half off the step, his midsection simply missing. The man with the rifle had been thrown back against the trench wall, his head lolled at an angle that no living neck could make, eyes staring glassily at the overcast sky. Beyond them, near the next bend, another German was on his knees, ears bleeding, hands flailing blindly. He fumbled for the pistol at his hip, fingers clumsy. I shot him twice in the chest. He jerked, sagged sideways, and was still. For a heartbeat, everything just stopped. The smell hit me first, burnt powder, coppery blood, the tang of exposed intestines, the acrid chemical bite of high explosive. Close up, war didn't smell like courage or glory. It smelled like a slaughterhouse in a thunderstorm. My stomach pitched, bile clawed up my throat. I swallowed it down savagely. If I started puking here in this narrow strip of death, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stop. "You all right, Miller?" Ox's voice floated in from behind me, oddly calm. I blinked, realizing that I'd gone still, my rifle half raised, my whole body locked. "I'm the word snagged." I forced it out. "I'm good." The sergeant pushed up beside me, Thompson at the ready. He took in the scene in a fraction of a second, his expression unreadable. "You did what you had to do," he said quietly, just for me. "Save the thinking for later, or you won't live to have anything to think about." He clapped my shoulder once, hard enough to jolt me back into motion. "We're not done. This trench runs all along the bluff. Every meter we clear makes that beach safer." As if on cue, a rattle of MG-42 fire from farther along cut across the general din. The angle of the trench blocked my view, but I knew that particular sound now. A bone saw tearing the air, the same song that had chewed men apart on the sand below. That one's still hosing the beach, the sergeant growled. We take it out, we give our boys a chance to get off that killing ground. He pointed to a narrow wooden ladder leaning against the trench wall, half buried under debris. Ox, up and over, see if there's a firing slit or bunker entrance on this section. Miller, you're with me, we push up the trench. If Ox can get a grenade in from above, we'll hit him from both sides. On it, Ox rumbled. He slung his rifle, grabbed the ladder, and heaved it upright. For a second I thought he was going to climb it like some fool in a training film, silhouette himself perfectly for every German on the hill. Instead, he shoved it at an angle, using it to brace himself as he scrambled up the side of the trench, staying low, almost crawling on his hands and knees. Careful, the sergeant barked after him. If you get your head blown off, I'm not climbing up there to fetch it. Ox grunted something that might have been a laugh and vanished over the lip. The sergeant turned to me, stay on my hip, clear every side spur, every nook. If it breathes and it's wearing gray, you shoot it before it shoots you. I nodded, throat too tight to talk. We advanced. The trench twisted like a snake, zigzagging to limit the effect of blasts. Every few yards there was a little alcove cut into the wall, some with ammo crates, some with field telephones, some with nothing but shadows and the faint smell of sweat. We passed a narrow side spur that dead-ended at a tiny dugout doorway, a rough wooden frame half blocked by a collapsible cot and an overturned mug. The sergeant snapped his Thompson toward the gap, eyes narrowed. Clear it, he ordered. I edged to the side, pressed my shoulder to the wall, and leaned just far enough to peer in. A single German sat inside, back against the dirt wall, legs splayed. His rifle lay just out of reach, his hand half extended toward it as if he'd been reaching when something hit him. Blood had blossomed across the front of his tunic from a neat hole just under the ribcage. He was younger than me, maybe 19, maybe 20. A wallet photo lay face down on the dirt near his boot. Without meaning to, I reached down with my bayonet tip and flipped it over. A blonde girl smiled up at me from a little square of paper, hair in braids, eyes bright. A cheap pressed flower necklace hung around her neck. Someone had written something in blocky German script at the bottom. I couldn't read it, but I could guess. I put my boot down on the picture before the wind, or my conscience, could do anything stupid, and backed out. Dead, I said, my voice sounded flat in my own ears. Then he's not our problem, the sergeant answered. Keep moving. We passed another little alcove with a field phone, its black handset knocked from the cradle, the wire severed and dangling. Farther on, a crate marked with stenciled black letters sat half open, belts of 7.92 ammunition spilling out like brass snakes. I stepped past a German sprawled across the duckboards, one hand still wrapped around the stock of his rifle. Half his face was just gone, torn away, bone and teeth exposed. The other half looked oddly peaceful, like a man asleep. For a wild, disorienting second, I thought he might have been a nice guy. He might have taken his little sister to the river on Sundays. He might have hated this uniform. Then a burst of MG-42 fire from up ahead snapped me back. We slid up to another corner, pressed flat. I see the nest, Ox's voice came from above us, suddenly very close. I glanced up and saw him crouched in a shallow hollow on the slope above, peering down past a clump of scrub. Concrete pillbox, firing slit facing the beach, but the trench feeds right into the back of it. You're about 15 yards away from their back door. How many? The sergeant called softly. Can't see inside, Ox replied. At least 3 silhouettes, one on the gun, 2 feeding and spotting, might be more deeper in. Can you get a grenade through that slit? The sergeant asked. Ox hesitated. Angle's bad, I lob one from here, it'll probably bounce off and roll back down on me, wouldn't make my day. All right, the sergeant said. He turned to me. Miller, that last frag was your party trick. You got anything else that goes boom? I patted my webbing, already knowing the answer. No more frags, Sergeant. He swore under his breath. Figures, they're a charge team behind us. As if summoned, a familiar voice floated up from the rear of the trench. We got bang for days, Sarge. Just tell us where to stick it. One of the engineers from the seawall cracked glasses and all jogged up, a canvas satchel slung at his side, a coil of fuse wrapped over his shoulder. His face was flushed, but his eyes were bright. Satchel charges, he said, patting the bag. TNT and hate, good for soft spots on hard problems. The sergeant jerked his chin toward the pillbox. We got a concrete tooth up there chewing on my beach. Trench goes to its back, you fix that. The engineer peered past the corner, gauging distance and angles, then nodded slowly. Yeah, back door's probably a steel hatch. We blow it, shrapnel and overpressure'll turn whoever's inside into puree. Just gotta get close enough to plant it. We, the sergeant said. Last I checked, we include some poor bastard who has to carry your present up there under fire. The engineer's jaw tightened. That be me, sergeant, my toys, my delivery. Something about the way he said it, no bravado, just simple fact, stirred a weird, fierce respect in me. I'll go with him, I heard myself say before my brain could protest. He can focus on the charge, I'll cover. The sergeant's eyes snapped to me hard. For a second he looked like he wanted to yell, then his gaze softened by a degree. You volunteering, Millers? Oh yes, sergeant. You know that bunker's been raking our beach since we got here. You take it out, you're saving a lot of our boys. I know, I said, and I did. I could hear that gun even now, hammering away down the slope, each burst maybe cutting down a man who just made it out of the water. All right, he said, you two go. Ox, you stay up there, put rounds into that slit the second they sense something's wrong, keep their heads down. Copy, Ox said from above. The engineer opened his satchel and pulled out a bundle of canvas-wrapped blocks wired together, about the size of a fat loaf of bread. A length of fuse and a blasting cap dangled from it. 30-second fuse, he said, hands moving quickly, attaching the cap. Maybe 25 in this wind, that's not a lot of time to get clear. So when I light this, we don't stop, we don't look back. We run like the devil kicked us and dive in the first hole we see. Sounds like a plan, I said, though my heart tried to punch its way out of my chest. He gave a tight grin, eyes crinkling behind cracked lenses. Name's Kaplan, by the way, in case we make it and somebody asks who the idiot was. Daniel Miller, I replied, in case they only find my dog tags. We moved. The final stretch of trench to the bunker's rear was low and narrow, roofed over in places with rough planks. The air felt staler here, more enclosed, the sounds of the outer battlefield muffled to a distant roar. All I could really hear was the ceaseless chattering of the MG-42 through the bunker's firing slit, so close now that each burst seemed to vibrate in my teeth. We crept along the wall, hunched, trying to make ourselves smaller than our shadows. I could feel the rough texture of concrete through thin layers of dirt as we neared the bunker's rear. The steel hatch appeared around the last bend, a thick rectangular door set into the concrete, paint blistered and scarred. No handle on the outside, just a heavy hinge and a bar. Kaplan sucked his teeth. They weren't planning on any surprise visitors back here. Above us, Ox fired a slow, steady rhythm into the bunker's front slit. The MG-42 wavered, sputtered, then resumed, but not as smoothly. They were rattled in there. Good. You said it, I'll watch, I whispered. He nodded, already moving. He flattened himself to the wall, crept up to the hatch, and pressed the satchel charge low against the seam where steel met concrete. My mouth went dry. If some German in that bunker decided to check the back door right now, he'd open it straight into Kaplan's face. I aimed my rifle down the trench, covering the approach in case anyone appeared from deeper along the line. The seconds stretched. Kaplan lashed the charge in place with a length of cord, hands moving deftly despite the adrenaline tremor I could see in his fingers. Then he pulled a little brass lighter from his pocket, thumbed the wheel, and coaxed a flame to life. You ready? He murmured. No, I said honestly, do it anyway. He touched the flame to the fuse. It caught instantly, a bright, sputtering snake of fire hissing along the cord. Go, Kaplan hissed, back. We ran. It was less running and more a half-crouched, scrambling lunge, boots slipping on damp duckboards, shoulders bruising themselves on the walls. I wanted to turn and look to see the fuse burning down, but I didn't dare. Farther, Kaplan yelled, around the bend. We dove around the last corner of the trench just as the charge went. The explosion was a different kind of sound than the grenades. It was deeper, meatier, a whump that I felt in my bones as if someone had struck the earth with a giant fist. The trench air compressed around us, then rebounded, carrying with it a hot, dusty gust. Concrete screamed behind us, an awful, cracking, tearing noise. Something heavy slammed into the trench roof above, sending splinters and little chips of stone raining down. For a second, the MG-42 song cut off completely. Then the air was full of other noises, human ones. Screams, some high and shrill, some low and gurgling. Someone shouted "Sanitator" over and over, voice bordering on hysteria. We scrambled back toward the hatch, or what was left of it. The steel door had been blown inward, twisted like a tin can. The concrete around it was cracked and cratered, chunks fallen in. Smoke and dust billowed from the ragged hole, tasting of burnt metal and blood. I climbed over the shattered threshold, rifle up, eyes watering from the smoke. Inside the bunker was a cramped, dimly lit space of concrete and shadow. The air was hot, stale, choked with dust motes swirling in the faint light filtering in from the front firing slit. The walls shook with the fatting echoes of the blast. The MG-42 lay on its mount, barrel bent, receiver cracked open like a broken spine. Beside it, the gunner had been thrown against the far wall, his body bent at an unnatural angle over a crate, legs twisted under him. The top of his skull was simply gone. Another man lay crumpled near the side wall, hands still half raised to cover his face. Shrapnel had ripped through his chest, turning his tunic into a ragged, red-rimmed mosaic. In the far corner, half hidden by a stack of ammo boxes, someone moved. "Don't," I barked, swinging my rifle toward the motion. A German stumbled into view, clutching his left arm to his chest. Blood poured between his fingers, dark and thick. His helmet was gone, a shallow gash scored his forehead. Eyes wide behind round spectacles, he stared at me, at my rifle, my uniform, my face. "Bitte nicht schießen," he gasped. "Please don't shoot." For a second, everything in me locked. This close, he wasn't a faceless enemy silhouette. He was just a man about my age, maybe a little older, with ink stains on his right hand like he'd spent his life writing instead of shooting. His mouth trembled. Kaplan appeared at my shoulder, panting, eyes darting around the bunker. He saw the German, the wound, the empty hands. "Hands up," Kaplan yelled. "Händhoch, do it." Slowly, the German let go of his ruined arm. Blood spilled freely now, pattering onto the concrete floor. He lifted his hands, palms outward, fingers shaking. "Nicht schießen," he repeated, voice cracking. "Ich ergebe mich, I surrender." I had never been this close to a German who wasn't trying to kill me before. Behind my eyes, images flickered, the man crucified on the wire, the slit bodies on the beach, Joe clutching his shredded arm. Rage flared, hot and immediate. Part of me howled. He sat in here feeding that gun that cut our boys apart. He doesn't deserve. But another voice, colder and older, spoke up. "You wear a uniform, you follow rules. You don't shoot a man who's thrown his hands up." The sergeant's boots crunched on concrete behind us. He took in the scene: dead men, ruined gun, wounded prisoner with a quick sweep. "You shoot him, Miller?" he asked. The German's eyes flicked between us, breath coming in short, terrified gasps. "No, Sergeant," I said slowly. He surrendered. The sergeant's jaw flexed. For a second I thought he might tell me to do it anyway. It would have been easy, just raise the rifle a fraction, squeeze the trigger, one more body on the floor. No paperwork, no prisoner to guard. But instead he spat into the dust and said, "Then he's a POW, we're not them." He jerked his chin toward the German. "Sit, hinsetzen." The German almost collapsed in relief, sliding down the wall until he sat on the floor, back against the concrete, wounded arm cradled in his lap. "Kaplan, wrap that before he bleeds out," the sergeant said. "He might know where their other nests are." Kaplan blinked. "You want me to patch up Jerry?" "I want intel," the sergeant snapped. "You want your buddies to keep getting chewed up because we're too proud to bandage one bastard, wrap his arm, then we ask questions." Kaplan hesitated only a second, then shrugged off his pack, digging for a field dressing. I stepped to the front of the bunker, toward the firing slit, drawn by the sudden, uncanny change in the soundscape outside. It was a quieter. Not silent, not by a long shot. Guns still barked up and down the bluff, mortars still thumped, men still shouted. But the brutal, unbroken chatter of this MG-42, the one that had been raking our stretch of beach since we'd landed, was gone. I peered out, careful to stay low. From this angle, the beach unfolded below me in a dizzying panorama. Wet sand near the waterline churned to red-streaked mud. The seawall dotted with little green-brown clusters of men, the surf still vomiting bodies and gear. But there was motion now. More men were moving off the wall, using the same breach in the wire we'd punched through, scrambling up in little groups, bounding from crater to crater. Some fell, but others kept going. I saw an officer waving a pistol, yelling, his mouth wide, probably the same lieutenant who'd screamed at us to move earlier. Farther down, two other bunkers still spat fire, their tracers stitching deadly lines across the beach. They were farther from us, angled differently, but their reach was still deadly. "What do you see?" the sergeant asked, joining me for a quick look. "We helped," I said softly. "They're getting off the sand now, not all of them but more." He nodded once. "Good, one tooth pulled, couple more to go." Behind us, Kaplan finished bandaging the German's arm. The wound was ugly, a long, ragged gash where a chunk of steel had chewed through muscle, but not immediately fatal if treated. The prisoner watched us with a mix of fear and a sort of stunned curiosity. Maybe he'd expected us to shoot him out of hand. Maybe he couldn't quite believe he was still alive. The sergeant squatted in front of him. "Name," he said. The German swallowed. "Feldwebel Ernst Weber." "Sergeant Weber," our sergeant translated automatically. "Good, you speak English, Sergeant Weber." "A little," Weber said haltingly. His accent was thick but understandable. "Schooled before." "Before," I thought, "before your country lost its mind." "How many more machine gun nests on this sector?" our sergeant demanded. Weber hesitated, looking from face to face. He wasn't just scared, he was calculating. My finger tightened on the trigger of my rifle of its own accord. "We don't have time for you to make up your mind," Kaplan snapped. "You saw what we did to your bunker, friend. You want us to toss you in the next one." Weber flinched, eyes going to the ruined MG, the dead men around him. "Three more," he said finally. "On this, how you say plateau, one there," he jerked his chin to the left, "in big bunker with mortar, one," he frowned, searching for words. "Open nest with sandbags and wood near tree stump," he gestured vaguely. "And one more farther near road to village." "Mortar," the sergeant repeated. "That explains the rain of hell on our boats." He turned to Kaplan. "Get that to the radio man. If he can raise anyone, we feed those positions to every gun we got." Kaplan nodded and slipped out, boots clattering on concrete as he ran back down the trench toward our line of advance. I looked back out the firing slit, scanning for the positions Weber had described. It wasn't hard. The big bunker squatted farther along the bluff, massive and angular, its embrasure wider, darker. Every so often, a heavy boom thumped from behind it, and a shell arced out over the water, landing among the ships offshore in a geyser of spray. Just below its lip, I could see the shadow of another MG, though its angle wasn't perfect for our stretch of beach. Closer, maybe 80 yards away, a sandbagged position had been dug into a slight rise, a lone, blasted tree stump beside it like a broken finger. An MG-42 crouched there too, firing in shorter bursts, sweeping left and right. The third nest near road to village. I couldn't see clearly from this bunker, the terrain folded away. "You did good, Miller," the sergeant said quietly, breaking my focus. "Beach ain't clear yet, but some of those boys down there will live to write letters home because you and Kaplan took this thing out." I didn't know what to say. The idea that what we'd done in this dark little box of concrete had rippled out to lives on the sand below felt unreal. "We still gotta survive to write ours," I answered finally. He gave a quick, grim smile. "That we do." Behind us, the radio man's voice, thin with static but elated, carried faintly down the trench. "I got Sarge, naval gunfire control on the horn. They're asking for targets." The sergeant's eyes lit like someone had handed him the keys to a kingdom. "Well, aren't we lucky," he said. "We just happen to be standing in the middle of a target-rich environment." He shot one last look at the broken MG, the ruined bodies, and the trembling prisoner, then back out at the beach where our men were clawing their way up the same slope we'd just climbed. "The ships brought us here," he said. "Now they're gonna help us stay." He slapped my shoulder again. "Come on, Miller, ours not over yet. We got more hills to take and more guns to silence before we can even think about breathing easy." I took a last look at the sea. A strip of gray under a heavier gray sky dotted with ships and smoke and tiny, ant-like figures, and then turned my back on it, following the sergeant out of the bunker and deeper into the German line. Behind my ribs, fear still chewed, but wound tight around it was something harder. We had landed on this shore for a reason. Every step we took up here, every bunker we cleared, every gun we busted was us putting our shoulder to the wheel of history and shoving. Hitler's Europe counted on us breaking. We were here to prove we wouldn't. Ben Etaenus Bengali ben Moinus, ben Patoinus, ben Agedenus, ben Ongshedenus, ben Ekebadeanus, ben Podedanus, ben Kotonaenus. The radio man was already half running down the trench toward us, handset pressed to his ear, cord dragging like a snake behind him. "I got him, Sarge," he yelled, voice tight with a mix of disbelief and relief. Naval gunfire control, some cruisers sittin' off the coast. They're askin' for targets. The sergeant's face changed. Not softer exactly, but sharper, like a carpenter seeing the exact tool he needs. Get your map out, he snapped. Kaplan Weber. Kaplan jogged back into the bunker, still a little wide-eyed from our satchel charge stunt. Weber, our wounded German sergeant, sat where we'd left him, back to the wall, one hand clamped over his bandaged arm, eyes following everything. The sergeant slapped a map case onto a crate, flipped it open, and spread a stained, creased chart of the coastline across the rough wood. The lines and contour marks meant little to me in that instant. The only important thing was that our little strip of hell was on there somewhere. We're here, the sergeant said, jamming a dirty finger onto a point on the map, the bluff above the sector where we'd landed. Bunker W something doesn't matter, Big Mortar Bunker is, he looked at Weber. Show me. Weber hesitated, glancing at the dead bodies of his crew, at the broken MG, at the smoking hatch we'd blown apart. Something passed across his face, grief, anger, maybe both. Then he exhaled slowly and leaned forward, tapping the map with a trembling finger. Here, he said, on Hill Zwanzigveer, 24, overlooks the road and the boats. The radio man rattled the grid coordinates into the handset, stumbling a little over numbers. A tinny voice crackled back, calm, precise, too far from this mud and blood to feel real. Fire mission 1 round ranging 3-gun salvo high explosive, the unseen voice said. Stand by for splash. The sergeant grabbed the handset for a second. Make it fast, Navy. These sons of bitches are chewing my boys up. Roger that, Red Dog, the voice replied. Guns are hot. He handed the handset back, then looked at us. You're about to hear what real artillery sounds like. A strange quiet settled around the bunker for a heartbeat. The German fire didn't stop, but my awareness of it dimmed as we all, Americans and one shaken German prisoner alike, tilted our heads toward the sea. The first salvo came in like a rumor. At first it was just a subtle change in the background noise, a faint building growl from offshore. Then it rose, like a freight train climbing a long, invisible hill, until the air itself seemed to tense. Splash in 5, the radio man relayed, listening to his set. 4-3-2. The guns hit. The earth jumped. Farther along the bluff, beyond a slight rise, a blossom of white-orange fire and black smoke erupted into the sky. A half-second later, the sound hit us, a titanic crack that rolled over the landscape like an angry god slamming a door. The blast wave slapped my face even from this distance. Dust sifted down from the bunker roof. Weber flinched so hard he slammed his wounded arm into the wall, gasping in pain. Over, the radio man said into his handset, listening. He says, short by about 50, adjusting. A second later, salvo fire for effect. 3 more distant booms from offshore. Then 3 more titanic impacts inland, each one a hammer blow against the sky. This time, the explosions walked up the hill. 1, 2, 3. Until the third detonation blossomed exactly where the mortar bunker squatted. The world above that bunker seemed to disintegrate. Smoke and debris geysered upward in a churning column. For a moment, the silhouette of the bunker's bunker roof lifted, then folded, as if some giant hand had pressed down on it from above. A ragged cheer went up along our section of trench, men whooping, cursing in delight, slapping helmets, thumping each other's backs. Send 'em another just to be sure, someone yelled. I found myself grinning like a maniac, adrenaline fizzing in my veins. The idea that somewhere out there, miles offshore, sailors in clean fatigues had just moved heaven and earth because some mud-soaked infantryman on a cliff asked them to, that connection felt like a steel cable running from my heart to the horizon. We were not alone on this rock. The sergeant allowed himself the ghost of a smile. Tell him good shot, he said to the radio man, and give him that sandbag nest by the tree stump next. Weber watched all this in stunned silence. When the third blast hit, he closed his eyes briefly, jaw working. Those were your friends, I asked before I could stop myself. He opened his eyes, met mine. Behind the fear there was something else now, something like defeat. Yes, he said quietly, but they shoot at your friends, that is war, yes. He wasn't asking for comfort, he was stating a fact. I had no answer that made sense. Sandbag nest about 80 yards, Kaplan called, peering out the slit with a small pair of binoculars he'd scavenged. Grid, he rattled off numbers, and the radio man repeated them into his set. Fire mission, came the flat naval voice. One gun, 3 rounds he, splash in 10. The next salvo screamed in lower, closer. We all ducked instinctively, although we were well inside the minimum safe distance, or maybe not. Hard to tell when you'd never had a friendly battleship shoot over your head before. The first round landed long, blowing a trench of earth just beyond the sandbag nest. The second was short, throwing up a plume of dirt below the position. The third hit almost on top of it. For a second, the sandbag nest just ceased to exist. One moment it was there, gun chattering, sandbags piled neat. The next, it was a violent, outward-rushing ball of dust and flame and whipping fabric. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing but a raw, smoking gouge in the hillside, sandbags shredded, the tree stump blown to jagged halves. No one cheered this time. Maybe we were getting used to it. Or maybe there was something sobering about seeing such concentrated power used on such a tiny target. Big bunker's gone, sandbag nest is gone, the sergeant said, thinking aloud. That still leaves the third one wherever the hell it is, and whatever infantry they got massing for a counter. Counter, I asked. You think they're just gonna sit here and let us carve 'em up, he snorted. Jerry's pulling back from the beach, sure, but he'll throw whatever he's got at the top of these draws to push us back into the water. That's what I do. A low, distant thump sounded inland, different from the naval guns, a more familiar, more intimate kind of artillery. A second later, a shell landed somewhere behind us, closer to the waterline, throwing up a fountain of sand and smoke. Inland batteries, Kaplan muttered. They're shifting fire from the water to the cliffs. Almost on cue, another shell screamed in closer. The whistling crescendo spiraled up my spine. DOWN, the sergeant roared. We dove for the floor as the shell hit somewhere just beyond the bunker, close enough that the whole structure shuddered. The shockwave slammed into us, hot and brutal. Bits of dirt and concrete rained from the ceiling. Someone outside the bunker screamed, a short, cut-off sound. The trench just beyond our door had partially collapsed. Where there had been a neat, vertical wall of timber and sandbags, there was now a jagged V of broken boards and dirt, half blocking the passage. Under the pile of debris, someone thrashed. Help, it was an American voice, choked, panicked. Christ, can't move. I was moving before the sergeant even shouted. The air outside felt sharper, full of dust and the hot, metallic reek of fresh explosive. I scrambled up the few steps from the bunker into the trench, boots skidding on loose dirt. A tangle of collapsed boards and earth blocked half the trench. A boot stuck out from underneath, twitching. A hand clawed weakly at the dirt near the bottom, fingers bleeding where nails had torn. Hang on, I yelled, dropping to my knees. I grabbed the nearest board and heaved. It shifted an inch, then stuck. Ox appeared at my shoulder like some kind of enormous, filthy guardian angel. Lift, he grunted. Together, we wrenched the board aside, then another. Dirt cascaded down, pattering over my helmet. I scooped it away with my hands, fingers scraping splinters. A face emerged from the mess, pale under the grime, eyes wild. A corporal maybe, by the 2 stripes caked in mud on his sleeve. Blood smeared his temple, but his helmet was still on. Jesus, he gasped when he saw us. Thought I was done, thought. Save it, Ox grunted. Can you feel your legs? The man wiggled his boots feebly. Yeah, I think. Then help us help you, I said, grabbing his webbing just below the shoulders. On 3, 1, 2, 3. We hauled, he pushed. For a second I thought he was wedged too deep. Then with a wet sucking sound, like something being pulled from thick mud, he tore free and slid forward, coughing up dirt. He lay there for a moment, chest heaving. Then he turned his head, peered back at the collapsed section. Dugan, he croaked. There was a guy, Dugan, behind me. We all went still. Anybody else under there? Ox yelled, raising his voice to be heard above the fatting echoes of the blast. Hey, you hear me? Knock if you can't talk. Silence. The freshly collapsed earth was already settling, compacting. If someone had been back there and hadn't made a noise by now. The sergeant climbed up behind us, eyes taking in the mess in a fraction of a second. Anyone else? He demanded. Not answering, Ox said tightly. The sergeant's jaw tightened. For a long second he stared at the heap, calculation, anger, and a grim kind of compassion warring behind his eyes. Mark it, he said finally. When we secure this sector and the fire lifts, we'll dig the rest. Right now we stay bottlenecked here, the next shell kills 10 more. The corporal, still lying half on, half off the duckboards, swallowed hard, eyes damp. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Then he just nodded once, jaw clenched so tight the muscles stood out. Orders were orders. The living needed us more than the maybe already dead. There was patriotism in that too, I realized, not the parade kind, but the ugly necessary kind. Doing the thing that hurt so the larger thing might live. Another shell screamed in somewhere down the bluff inland, farther away this time. Maybe their battery was adjusting. Maybe they were just groping in the smoke. Move, the sergeant said. We don't stay clustered around this coffin. We dragged the shaken corporal back toward the bunker, pressed him against a firmer section of trench. You with anybody? The sergeant asked. Second platoon, Baker Company, he panted. Lost my squad leader in the surf, just been following whoever was going forward. You're with us now, the sergeant said shortly. You can stand and shoot. Why yes, sergeant. Then you're a rifle in my line, congratulations. He pulled us all in against the trench wall, out of the direct line of fire from inland, and sketched the situation in rapid, stabbing sentences. Mortar bunker gone, sandbag MG gone, one more nest somewhere near the road to the village, plus whatever riflemen survived our little party. Navy's hours when we can see and mark targets. Beach is still hot, but more of our boys are getting up here. That means we got a chance, but only if we keep punching. He jabbed a finger to the right, along the trench. That third nest is still raking some other poor bastard's sector. We don't know exactly where it is, and the ships can't hit what we can't point to. So we do what infantry, always done, we go find it with our own feet and shut it down. He looked at me, then at Ox, Kaplan, and the shaken corporal. Weber says there's a junction a little ways along that cuts toward the road. Nest'll be tied into that. We push to that junction, scout the side trench, and either mark the bastard for the Navy or take him ourselves. And the prisoner? Kaplan asked, nodding toward Weber. Weber watched us with an expression that was part curiosity, part fatalism. You will attack again, he said quietly. Always forward. Yes, Sergeant Weber, our sergeant said. Always forward. He pointed to two riflemen down the line. You two babysit Jerry. He bleeds out, that's one thing. He gets lost by a stray bullet and I'll find out. We're not SS. They nodded, faces grim. Whatever anger they felt at the man who'd helped man this gun was swallowed under discipline. We moved. The trench felt less like a snake now and more like an artery, carrying us deeper into the pulsing heart of the German defense. Every twist and turn seemed to whisper ambush. Every shadow hid the potential for a muzzle flash. I checked my watch as we jogged, its luminous hands smeared with mud but still visible. It was barely past 700. Less than an hour since we'd been pitching around in that boat, staring at a gray blur on the horizon. Less than an hour since the ramp dropped and the world went sideways. In that sliver of time, whole lives had begun and ended. Men who'd kissed their sweethearts goodbye in England last week were now scattered in pieces across French sand. And we were still moving, still pushing, because the alternative, stopping, meant doom not just for us, but for the invasion, for everything that hung on it. Forward. We reached the junction Weber had mentioned, a wider section where another trench crossed ours, one arm bending inland toward the unseen road, the other slanting back down toward the beach. A couple of German bodies already lay here, riddled with bullets, their blood pooling in the low places. One had a field telephone handset clutched in a death grip, wire severed behind him. The sergeant raised a hand, and we flattened against the walls. Kaplan, he said, you and Ox take a quick peek down that inland spur. Stay low. If you see the nest, mark it and get your asses back here. What are we marking with? Kaplan asked. The sergeant dug into his jacket and came up with a yellow smoke grenade, the paint chipped. This'll do for now. Toss it near the position and call it in. Navy sees yellow smoke, they'll know where to drop the hammer. Kaplan took it, eyes glinting. Yes, sir. Ox checked his rifle, rolled his shoulders, and crawled after Kaplan into the side trench, moving like a huge, cautious bear. They vanished around a bend, their boots scuffing softly on the duckboards. Silence pooled in their wake, thick and heavy. I could hear my own heartbeat again, the rasp of my breath, the distant, irregular thunder of artillery. The sergeant and I waited with the corporal, rifles up, eyes locked on the corner Kaplan and Ox had rounded. 10 seconds stretched into 30, 30 into 60. Then faint, distant, a stutter of gunfire, a burst from a German weapon. A couple of answering shots closer together, Kaplan's M1 maybe or Ox's. Then nothing. I realized I was holding my breath and forced myself to exhale slow. "You think they found it?" I whispered. "They found something," the sergeant muttered. "Question is who found who first." The seconds crawled. Finally, heavy boots thudded back around the bend. Ox appeared, a dark smear of something, maybe blood, maybe mud, across his cheek. Kaplan slid in behind him, panting, clutching his side. "You hit," the sergeant demanded immediately. "Not mine," Kaplan wheezed. "Belongs to the guy who tried to ventilate me." He lifted the hand from his side. The smear was dark but not fresh. Clipped a Jerry in the shoulder. Ox finished him. "What do you see?" the sergeant pressed. "Road trench runs up about 40 yards, then opens into a little depression overlooking the macadam," Kaplan said, breath steadying as he spoke. "Nest is dug into the far lip, sandbags and logs, MG watching the approach from the village. They've got it turned partly toward the beach too, covering that sector you mentioned." "How many?" the sergeant asked. "Two on the gun that I saw," Ox rumbled. "Probably a loader and a spot or two tucked low, maybe more in foxholes around it." "Can you get close?" the sergeant asked. "Close enough to drop that smoke without them turning you into hamburger." Kaplan grimaced. "We can crawl up the side of the depression. There's a little rise we can use, but we'll be in spit-in distance by the time we can toss it. They see us, we're toast." "I can give you covering fire from this trench," the sergeant said, thinking aloud. "But angle's bad, and Navy shells that close to you." He trailed off. We all imagined it. Yellow smoke billowing, a distant cruiser belching flame, shells screaming in, the nest vaporized, and a couple of American bodies along with it. "I'll go," I heard myself say. All eyes snapped to me. "I'm thinner," I added because it was true. "Smaller target. Kaplan shows me where I crawl up, toss the smoke, crawl back. You call it in the second you see color." "And if they see you before you throw?" the sergeant asked evenly. "Then at least you know exactly where they are," I said. My voice shook a little, but the words themselves felt right. He stared at me for a long heartbeat, weighing something. Behind his eyes I saw calculations. Risk to one man versus lives saved on the beach and in the trench, chance of success versus cost of failure. "You sure about this, Miller?" he asked quietly. "This ain't an order, I can send someone else." Images flickered in my brain, Joe on the slope, his arm ruined but his eyes fierce, telling me to go. The kid from Texas who might have drowned before he even reached the sand. The rows of cots that would be set up somewhere tonight, bloody sheets and exhausted surgeons, families months from now getting telegrams in thin government envelopes. If someone didn't mark that nest, a lot more of those envelopes were going to be delivered. "I'm sure," I said. My heart wasn't, my stomach sure as hell wasn't, but something deeper was. Kaplan's mouth twisted. "I can go with him, Sarge, 2 sets of eyes." "No," the sergeant cut him off. "I need you down here on the radio, talking the Navy onto target. Ox, you'll be on the trench lip with me, putting fire on that nest the second they show their heads." He looked back at me. "You get no hero points for dying before you pop that smoke. You hug the earth like it's your best girl. You don't move unless you have to. You got that?" "Oh yes, Sergeant." Kaplan pressed the yellow smoke grenade into my palm. It felt heavier than it should, rough paint scraping my skin. "I'll show you the path," he said, "then you're on your own." We moved again, back down the inland spur, the same way Kaplan and Ox had just come. The further we went, the more the sounds of the main beach faded behind us, replaced by the nearer crack of rifles, the lower throbs of mortars, the occasional rattling burst of an MG-42. The trench climbed slightly, then flattened, then climbed again in a series of shallow steps. After maybe 40 yards, the rough wooden overhead cover stopped. Earth banks rose on either side and the gray light from above brightened. Kaplan raised a hand, dropping to his belly. We followed suit, crawling the last few feet to the end of the covered section. He pointed with 2 fingers over the lip. "There," he whispered. I inched up, careful to keep my helmet below the rim, and peered out. We were at the edge of a shallow, bowl-shaped depression, maybe 30 yards across, sloping gently down then up again. Beyond it, the ground rose to form a low ridge, and in the middle of that ridge, half carved into the earth, sandbags and logs formed a rough horseshoe of a machine gun nest. From here, I could see the dark mouth of an MG-42 poking between the bags, muzzle dipping and raising as it swept its arcs. Beyond the nest, a narrow road ran along the top of the bluff, lined with a broken fence. Farther still, through drifting smoke, I could see hints of houses, Vierville maybe, or another little French village. 2 Germans were visible in the nest, one hunched over the gun, the other kneeling beside him, a belt of ammo draped over his shoulder. One more shape moved in the shadows behind, maybe a spotter. They were partially turned toward the sea, attention focused on some threat down and to the right of us. Flashes from below lit their faces intermittently as they fired. "If we go straight at him, they'll see us halfway down the bowl," Kaplan murmured. "But that lip on the left," he pointed to a slightly higher, thicker section of grass and scrub along the depression's side. "You crawl under that, you can get within maybe 10 yards before you gotta pop up to throw." 10 yards, I repeated, throat dry. "That's like tossin' a baseball from the pitcher's mound to home," Kaplan said, trying for reassurance. "Except the catcher has a machine gun and really hates you." He gripped my forearm. "Look, if at any point it looks bad, you back off. We'll find another way. You dying for nothing helps nobody." "I copy," I said, because that's what good soldiers said. He slithered back toward the trench junction, leaving me alone at the end of the cover. Alone with a yellow can of smoke that a whole bunch of people were about to depend on. I lay on my belly for a second, just feeling the earth under me, the roughness of the dirt, the prickling stems of trampled grass, the faint vibration of distant blasts. Then I thought of home. Of the heavy steel mill air in Scranton, the way the sparks would fly like orange fireflies when the ladles tipped. Of my father wiping his hands on a rag and saying, "This war don't end over here, Danny. It ends over there. Don't make us send another generation to finish the job." Of Emily with that damn kite, running and running even when it wouldn't catch the wind. Of all the men on that beach below, who had run through bullets and water so that some skinny kid from Pennsylvania could now crawl through French dirt with a smoke grenade in his hand. Forward. I slid over the lip. The ground outside the trench felt obscenely exposed. Without the comforting hug of vertical walls, I might as well have been naked. I pressed myself as flat as I could, helmet almost scraping the dirt, and began to crawl. Every inch was work. My elbows dug furrows in the earth, my toes pushed, my thighs burned. The lip on the left loomed above me like the side of a low, grassy wall. If I stayed close enough to it, it hid me from the nest mostly. Probably, I hoped. The MG-42 up ahead rattled again, sending thrums through the soil. Each burst made my heart stutter. I moved in the tiny windows between. Burst, crawl, burst, crawl. A fly buzzed near my ear, drunk on the smell of sweat and fear. I ignored it and kept moving. 15 yards, 10. I could hear voices now, faint over the gun's stutter, harsh German words, shouted commands, maybe jokes. To them, I was just another anonymous target sector somewhere below. They had no idea I was crawling on my belly like a snake, inching toward them. 8 yards. 7. My fingers brushed something metal half buried in the dirt, a spent shell casing still warm. Someone had fought here not long ago, maybe driven back, maybe dead. 6 yards. I stopped, chest heaving. Any closer and the lip's angle would hide the nest from me as much as it hid me from them. I needed a clear line of sight to toss the smoke. Slowly, I brought the grenade up into my field of view. Yellow paint chipped, scratched, pin intact, spoons snug under my thumb. My hands shook so badly I had to clench my fists around the casing. "Steady, Miller," I whispered to myself. "This is like lobbing a ball to Joe in the lot. You've done that 1,000 times." Except Joe wasn't here. Joe was somewhere down slope, bleeding into French dirt. I clenched my jaw, bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, used the pain to focus. "Okay," I breathed, "okay." I pulled the pins. The little ring came free with a soft metallic snick. I held the spoon down with my thumb, feeling the fuse inside the grenade pressing, eager to burn. I needed to be up and throwing in one motion. Every fraction of a second counted. If I froze halfway, if I hesitated with my arm up silhouetted. I drew in one more breath that felt like it might be my last. Then I pushed up onto one knee and rose just high enough to see over the lip. The nest was right there, so close I could see the stubble on the gunner's jaw, the black smudge of grease on his cheek. His helmet was tipped forward, eyes narrowed as he sighted down the barrel. The loader beside him was just turning his head as if some animal sense told him something was wrong. Our gazes met. For the second time that day, I saw my enemy not as a far-off shape, but as a man sweaty, scared, doing his job same as me. "Chase," he shouted, fumbling for his sidearm. I released the spoon and threw. Benetaenus, Ibn Stoenus, Ben Patoenus, Ibn Agedenus, Ibn Ongshedenus, Ibn Ekebadenus, Ibn Podedenus, Ben Kotonaenus, Ben Atenus, Ibn Aenus, Ibn Patienus, Ibn Golpoenus, Ibn Sheshenus, Ibn Hobenus. I released the spoon and threw. The smoke grenade left my hand and sailed in a short, tight arc, the fuse already spitting and hissing. For a fraction of a second it hung against the gray sky, a little yellow can twisting end over end. Then the world tried to kill me. The loader in the nest moved faster than I would have believed. His hand flashed for his sidearm even as his mouth formed another curse. The gunner jerked the MG-42 muzzle toward me, barrel swinging like an accusing finger. I didn't wait to see if the grenade landed where I wanted. I dropped. The instant I flattened, the MG-42 opened up furious. Rounds tore into the lip where my head had been not even a heartbeat earlier, shredding grass and dirt, kicking clods into the air. The sound was a chainsaw in my bones. I felt the shock of impacts through the earth, little hammer blows running up my ribs. Dirt cascaded over my helmet, peppered my neck. One round hit so close I felt the hot breath of it brush my shoulder like a finger made of fire. Move, some distant, rational part of my brain said. Move or you die right here. I wriggled, dragging myself sideways along the slope, hugging the ground so hard it felt like I could burrow into it. The trick was to not move in a straight line, little angles, little shifts. I had no idea if any of it mattered at this range, but doing something felt better than freezing. Behind me, the smoke grenade clanked off the front sandbags of the nest and dropped just in front of the position, landing in the shallow lip of earth at its base. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then thick yellow smoke gushed out, boiling up in a sudden, furious cloud. It ballooned, caught by the channel wind, and began to pour across the nest, over the sandbags, up into the gunner's face. The MG-42 tone changed, stutters instead of long bursts, the gunner coughing, blind. The loader shouted something I couldn't hear clearly, waving a hand in front of his face as if that would clear it. From the trench behind me, the sergeant's shout carried faintly. Yellow smoke, that's it, marked. Radio man, give it to the Navy right on that smoke. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. I clawed my way back toward the cover of the side trench, every inch a lifetime. The ground seemed to stretch under me, distance refusing to shrink. 10 yards. Rounds snapped overhead, wild now, chewing random furrows across the slope. Behind the smoke, shapes moved in confusion. One German staggered up out of the cloud, coughing, eyes streaming, hands out as if he could push the color away. For a crazy second, he looked like a man stepping out of a burning building. Someone in our trench fired. The German jerked, spun, and collapsed back into the smoke, yellow tendrils curling around his body. 8 yards. The radio man's voice, shrill with adrenaline, filtered up. Grid marked, request immediate fire, 3 rounds, danger close, repeat, danger close, we are within 50 of target. Danger close, I thought numbly, that was one way to put it. 6 yards. A round smacked into the dirt inches from my hand, flicking grit into my eyes. I blinked hard, tears streaming, but didn't stop. Couldn't, stopping was dying. 4 yards. A shadow loomed suddenly in front of me, big, dark, blocking the line back to the trench. My whole body flinched, trying to twist my rifle around to bring it up for a hopeless shot at close range. A massive hand clamped on the back of my webbing and yanked. For a second the world spun. My boots left the ground. Then I was sliding backward, roughly, over the lip of the trench, down into the narrow safety of earth and timber. I slammed into the far wall, hard enough that stars burst behind my eyes. Ox loomed over me, breathing hard, his big frame hunched to stay below the rim. You pick the worst places to sunbathe, Miller, he grunted. I sucked in a ragged breath, every muscle shaking. Thanks, I managed. No time, the sergeant snapped from a few feet away. His eyes were on the smoke, which now covered the nest entirely, thick, rolling plumes of yellow marking it like a beacon. He had the radio man's handset in his hand, knuckles white. His voice was iron cold. Naval battery, this is Red Dog. Target is yellow smoke, repeat, yellow smoke, grid confirmed, drop 3 on it now. We are under a minute from losing the man who marked it. Roger, Red Dog, came the tinny reply. Guns are firing, splash in 15. 15 seconds. My watch face swam in front of me. The luminous hand crept infinitesimally forward. I counted automatically in my head, 1, 2, 3. Above, the MG-42 fire had faltered but not stopped. Blind or not, the gunner was still sending bursts wherever he thought the enemy might be. Rounds cracked overhead, smacking into the trench lip. A splinter of wood cut my cheek. 4, 5, 6. Somewhere inland, German artillery thumped again, searching. 7, 8. I realized my mouth was moving, silent words tumbling out. Not really a prayer, just a desperate litany. Let it be on target. Let them not fall short. 9, 10. The low, growing growl of naval guns reached us, faint but unmistakable, like an approaching storm rolling across metal rails. Down, the sergeant roared, everybody downs. 11s. I pressed myself into the trench floor, hands over my helmet, forehead in the dirt. Ox did the same, his bulk curling around like a shield. Kaplan crouched over the radio man, yanking him lower by his harness. 12. The sound built, a freight train charging toward some unseen station. 13. For a split second, everything seemed to hold its breath. Even the MG-42 hesitated, as if the men behind it felt something vast bearing down on them. 14. The shells hit. The world became white fire and sound. Even from 50 yards out and sheltered in the trench, it felt like the sky had fallen on my back. A titanic crack slammed into us, loud enough to erase thought. The ground bucked under my chest, a living thing surprised by pain. A second blast overlapped the first, then a third, 3 hammer blows in rapid succession, space and time between them smeared by shock. Dirt and rock and smoke roared over the trench, a hot, choking wave. Something heavy clanged off the timber overhead and bounced away with a skitter of stone. Maybe a rock, maybe a piece of the gun, maybe part of the ridge itself. For a terrifying heartbeat, I thought the trench might collapse, bury us all. Boards creaked, sandbags groaned, dust poured down like a gray curtain. Then the aftershock washed past, leaving an odd, vacuum-like stillness in its wake. My ears didn't ring this time, they were beyond that. Sounds came back as distant, muted smudges, as if I were underwater. I lifted my head, every muscle protesting. The sergeant was already up on one knee, face ghost white under the layer of dust. He peered cautiously over the trench lip. "Well," Kaplan croaked. The sergeant exhaled slowly. "It's gone," he said. "Jesus, it's just gone." I dragged myself up beside him and risked a look. Where the nest had been, the ridge was now a raw, cratered wound. The sandbags were shredded, logs splintered, earth scooped out in a rough bowl. Smoke and dust hung in the air, shot through with little twinkles of falling debris. The yellow smoke was mostly obliterated, ripped apart by the blast. Of the gun and its crew, there was nothing recognizable. Just scraps of metal and darker shapes half buried in the churned earth. I felt sick and exultant at the same time. "That's the last one on this stretch," the sergeant said grimly. "At least the last big one. Beach should feel that in a minute." Almost as if he'd spoken to the battlefield itself, the quality of sound from below began to shift. The unbroken, murderous chatter of machine guns eased. In its place rose something else. Shouts, whistles, the sharp crack of more rifles, a few isolated MG bursts, but no longer that steady, unrelenting scythe of fire. I climbed a little higher, enough to see over the depression to the road beyond, then beyond that to the slope leading down toward the sea. Men were moving, lots of men's. Green-brown shapes crawled and sprinted up the bluffs, clumps of soldiers who'd been pinned behind the seawall now surging forward in little waves. Farther to the left and right, I could see muzzle flashes as our own squads worked through other trenches and positions. Down on the beach, more landing craft ground in, their ramps dropping onto wet sand that was still dangerous but no longer just a flat killing field. Smoke drifted across the water from burning wrecks, but behind that more ships loomed, an armada stretching to the horizon. For the first time since I'd set foot in France, I saw something like momentum on our side. "We did it," Kaplan breathed. "Son of a bitch, we actually cracked it." "For now," the sergeant said. He wasn't smiling exactly, but there was a different set to his shoulders, a loosening of some invisible weight. "Jerry, not done. He'll pull back, dig in again, counterattack when he can. But the beachhead's not dying today, not on this hill." He turned to me. "You still in one piece, Miller?" I took stock. My left hand tingled strangely from wrist to fingertips, a leftover from the earlier grenade blast maybe. My cheek throbbed where splinters and dirt had cut it. My ears felt stuffed with cotton, but everything seemed to work when I willed it to. "Yes, Sergeant," I said. He looked at me for a long second, then nodded once. You did good. That was a fool's errand that needed doing. You volunteered and you came back. You can put that in your pocket for a rainy day." I didn't know what to say. The praise felt heavy, like another piece of kit added to my load. "Ox Kaplan, you too," he added. "You boys made this possible. Remember that when the shakes hit tonight." "Well, the shakes?" I hadn't thought that far ahead. The idea of tonight felt foreign, distant, like a rumor from another war. A movement in the main trench drew our attention. A medic with a red cross on his helmet crawled past, heavier bag slung over his shoulder, eyes scanning every face he passed. "Doc," I called, "you been up the slope. You seen a PFC Harper from Alabama. Joe Harper, left arm torn up." He paused, frowning as he searched his memory through the fog of too much blood and too many names. "Harper, Harper," he snapped his fingers. "Freckled joker won't shut up even when he's bleeding." "That sounds like him," I said, a tightness clutching my chest. "Got him about 20 minutes ago, halfway up the bluff," the medic said. "Shrapnel in the arm, grazed to the head. Lucky son of a," he bit the word off. "He was still conscious, flirting with my aide while we bandaged him. We sent him down to the aid station on the beach." Relief crashed into me so hard my knees went weak. "He's alive?" I asked, needing to hear it again. "Unless he talked himself to death in the last half hour, yeah," the medic said. "He'll be on a ship tonight if the Navy can get close enough. Probably wake up in England with a nice scar to impress the nurses." I laughed, a rough, broken sound, half sobbing, half hysterical. Ox clapped my shoulder. Kaplan grinned. "See," Kaplan said, "some people will do anything to get out of work." "Thanks, Doc," I said, swallowing hard. He nodded once. "Don't make it for nothing," he said, then moved on, eyes already searching for the next patch of red that needed his hands. The sergeant checked his watch, then glanced at the sky, the low, featureless gray ceiling that had watched all this indifferent. 0720, he muttered. Hour and change since first wave hit. He looked at us, really looked, as if trying to burn our faces into his memory. "You're gonna remember this hour for the rest of your lives," he said quietly. "Hell, I will too if I live long enough to have a rest of my life." He jerked his head toward the inland slope. "But the day's not done. Beachhead needs to connect to the guys off to our flank. Village needs to be cleared. Jerry's gonna test this line, see if we're serious about staying." He raised his voice. "Listen up, we hold this trench and this draw until battalion tells us different. Anyone comes down that road in field gray, you make 'em regret waking up this morning. Ammo from the beach is coming up, water too. Till then, ration what you got. You're the hinge of this gate right now. If you break, they slam the door on us and throw us back into the sea." The corporal we dug out of the collapse swallowed hard but tightened his grip on his weapon. "We're not breaking, Sergeant." "You'd better not," the sergeant said. "I'm getting too old to do this again on some other beach." He moved off down the line, checking positions, barking little corrections, encouraging, cursing, playing that strange, vital role of the man in between. Between chaos and order, between fear and action. I found myself a niche in the trench wall, a spot where the bank was high and the overhead cover still mostly intact. From here, I could see through a narrow gap both down toward the sea and up toward the road. The yellow smoke from the last nest drifted apart, torn by the wind, revealing only the cratered scar the Navy had left behind. Beyond that, the road was strangely empty for the moment, no trucks, no columns of gray. Just smoke, broken fence posts, and the hint of red roofs in the distance. Down the slope, more of our boys were reaching the top now, some stumbling, some upright, all of them wide-eyed at the carnage. A captain with a bandaged head climbed over the seawall, bellowing orders, pointing men toward different draws. Little units, fragments of companies and platoons began to coalesce around leaders who hadn't been killed or frozen. Radios crackled. Whistles blew. The chaos of landing was resolving into something like an advance. And in the middle of it, I stood with my back to a German trench wall, hands shaking around my rifle, mud drying on my face, the taste of cordite and fear thick in my mouth. This was only 1 hour. Maybe 70, 80 minutes now if you counted the time in the boat before the ramp dropped. In that span I had climbed out of a landing craft under a storm of machine gun fire, watched men fall around me like wheat, thrown myself into the channel and nearly drowned under the weight of my own country's steel. Crawled across sand that ran pink with blood, seen a man crucified on barbed wire, run through curtains of bullets that should have cut me in half. Cleared a trench, thrown grenades that turned young men into ruined meat. blown open a bunker with an engineer's satchel while the men inside screamed. Looked a surrendering enemy in the eyes and chosen not to shoot. Dragged a man out from under a collapsed trench roof, knowing someone else behind him might be beyond saving. Crawled on my belly toward a machine gun nest with a bright yellow can in my hand, and an entire sector's fate on my shoulders for a few seconds. Called death down from ships I couldn't even see, trusting men with slide rules and rangefinders to put steel where we needed it and not on our heads. That was a full lifetime in itself, and yet it was only the beginning of this day. Only the beginning of this campaign, only a sliver of a war that had already eaten years and continents. "Hey," Kaplan said softly, sliding down beside me in the trench. "You okay?" I realized my hands were still trembling so badly I could barely keep my rifle steady. Sweat had dried in cold patches under my webbing. My jaw ached from how hard I'd been clenching it. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "Ask me when it stops." "It won't stop," he said, not unkindly. "Not anytime soon, but you get used to moving anyway." He dug into his pocket and came up with a crumpled pack of cigarettes, slightly damp. "You smoke." "Not usually," I said. "Today's not usually," he replied, shaking one out and passing it over. "Consider it a medal." My fingers were clumsy on the match, but I managed to light it. The first drag burned my throat, the second settled something in my chest. We sat there for a minute, sharing silence and cheap tobacco, watching more of our countrymen spill into this little corner of France, turning it, step by bloody step, from German-held ground into something else. "Why'd you volunteer?" Kaplan asked after a while, eyes on the horizon. "For the smoke run," I said. "Felt like somebody had to. I happened to be standing there." "I mean for all of this," he gestured vaguely to the trench, the beach, the rising shapes of ships offshore. "The war, you could have stayed home, found some deferment, worked a critical job. You're a smart guy, I can tell." I thought of Scranton again, of the mill's whistle, of the black dust that settled on every surface, of the faces at church the Sunday after Pearl Harbor when the pastor had spoken of sacrifice and duty and evil. "Because somebody had to stop this," I said slowly. "Hitler, the camps, the bombed cities, the boots on people's necks. We're a long way from perfect back home, but we don't build ovens for people. We don't burn books. We don't put chains back on the world." I took another drag, watching the ember glow. My old man used to say, "If you get the chance to put your shoulder against history and push it in the right direction, you damn well do it, even if the weight crushes you." Kaplan snorted softly. He sounds like my rabbi, less Yiddish, more steel. "You," I asked, "why are you here crawling under barbed wire with dynamite?" He shrugged one shoulder. "Family, from Poland, or was, letters stopped common 2 years ago. I figure every bunker I blow, every nest I mark, maybe that's one less train rolling east. Maybe I'll find out later they didn't make it, but I know what I'm doing matters." He nodded toward the beach. "And look at 'em. Farm boys from Iowa, miners from West Virginia, machinists from Detroit, all poured into this little strip of sand 'cause somebody said freedom was worth the crossing. We let that sit between us." After a while, the sergeant came back, face lined but eyes fierce. "Battalions linked with the Brits on our left," he said. "We hold this draw. They're sending rangers through to push inland toward that village and the crossroads. Armor's still stuck on the sand, but they'll find a way off. When they do, this road, where they're coming up." He looked down the trench, then at us. "Our job for the next few hours is simple. Don't let Jerry take this back. We bleed here so the guys behind us can roll their tanks through and end this war a little faster." He glanced at my watch, then at his own. 0730, he said. "1 hour since H hour, feels like 100, I know, but you made it through the first." He clapped my shoulder again, then Kaplan's, then Ox's. "You're assault troops now. Whatever you were yesterday, student, steelworker, joker, you're part of the spear. Remember that when it gets dark and you wonder if today meant anything." He moved on, his silhouette briefly framed against the gray sky before ducking back under cover. I looked at my watch again, the hands ticked forward, indifferent. 600 on the boat, hands shaking, praying, thinking about home. 610 ramp down, water, blood, bullets. 615 hugging steel on the beach, watching men die by the dozen. 06200640. Craters, crawls, jumps from cover to cover, each sprint a coin flip. 645 seawall, packed shoulder to shoulder with shaking men listening to orders shouted over death. 650 up the bluff through wire and grenades and terror. 700 into the trench, grenades, close quarters killing, bunker assault. 710 naval guns roaring overhead, tearing concrete and men apart. 0720-0730, last nest marked and destroyed. Beachhead breathing instead of bleeding out. In hours. That was all. But in that hour, I'd gone from a kid who'd never fired in anger to a man who'd killed with his own hands, who'd crawled toward fire instead of away from it, who'd felt the full weight of his country on his shoulders and not been crushed. Fear hadn't left me. If anything, it had sunk deeper, lodging somewhere under my ribs like a permanent wound. I knew now viscerally in my bones how easily the next step, the next breath could be my last. But wrapped around that fear was something stronger, a sense of having stood where it mattered. In that first hour on Omaha, I learned what patriotism really was. Not speeches, not parades, not pretty words in newspapers. It was the sergeant dragging men off the beach when they froze. It was Kaplan crawling under fire with TNT to blow a hole for men he'd never met. It was Ox hauling me into the trench when he could have stayed under cover. It was the medic dressing a German prisoner's wound because we were not what we were fighting. It was Joe bleeding on the slope telling me to keep going. It was sailors miles offshore, swinging their guns to our defense on nothing more than a scratchy radio call and a set of numbers. It was 1,000 small, stubborn choices to move forward when every sane instinct screamed to run. Years later, back home older, with more scars than I could count, I'd be sitting on my porch in Scranton, watching my own son mow a green American lawn, the flag on the stoop stirring in a gentler breeze. People would ask sometimes about the war, about D-Day, about what it was like. I never told them everything. Some things belonged to the dead and the men who'd stood beside me. Some nightmares didn't need an audience. But when I did talk, I always came back to that first hour. To the feel of the landing craft slamming through the waves, to the taste of salt and diesel and fear, to the sight of France rising from the gray like something out of a fever dream. To the moment the ramp dropped and the world became a storm of metal. To the cold steel of the obstacle on the beach and the warmth of Joe's elbow at my side. To the deafening roar of naval guns saving us from concrete we couldn't crack alone. To the yellow plume of smoke that marked a gun for death, and the knowledge that my arm, my throw, had shifted the line between life and death for men I'd never know. War didn't make me a hero, it didn't make me special, it didn't cleanse or ennoble anything. What it did in that hour was show me exactly who I was when everything else was stripped away. I was Daniel Miller, 21, from Scranton, Pennsylvania. I was scared out of my mind. And I went forward anyway because my country needed me to. That was enough.